Chapter 2906. Lunatic Bailey. Don't stop me. Sure Lulan didn't notice anything. She turned around to struggle free from Nye Tian's grip, only to see the latter's solemn and cautious expression. She immediately realized that Nye Tian had noticed something. She asked softly, "What's wrong?" "Someone's coming." Nye Tian replied in a low voice, gesturing for Sure Lulan to be quiet. Following that, the two of them moved, hiding behind a boulder in the valley and retracting their auras. A few moments later, several auras appeared. "Who is the person we're trying to capture?" "Lord Patriarch wants to capture him alive." "What does he mean?" "I heard that person's blood has a special stimulating effect on Manjusaka. Lord Patriarch wants to use his blood to open the scarlet blood path." "Can a single person's blood be so powerful?" "Our Sure family has been preparing for the scarlet blood sacrificial formation for several million years." Several voices sounded. Although they had intentionally lowered their voices, Nye Tian and Sure Lulan heard them clearly. Following that, several black-robed cultivators appeared. After entering the valley, they only swept a glance over the place and left without inspecting it carefully. Only after these people had left did Nye Tian and Sure Lulan walk out. "Father wants to capture you." Sure Lulan stared blankly at Nye Tian in shock. Of course she knew that the person they were talking about was Nye Tian. "Looks like I've become the biggest sacrifice." Nye Tian smiled bitterly, helplessness written all over his face. He hadn't expected that the demon god's blood would have such a powerful stimulating effect on Manjusaka. "I'm going to find Father and have him stop the scarlet blood sacrificial formation." Sure Lulan's eyes flickered as she looked at Nye Tian. "Come with me." Nye Tian's face darkened. This little girl was really cute and naive. The Cloudy Buddha family had been preparing for the scarlet blood sacrificial formation for countless years. Nye Tian guessed that the Cloudy Buddha family had given up their rule over the sacred soul region for the sake of the scarlet blood sacrificial formation. After all, the temptation of ruling a domain was not as great as entering the holy world. How could such a grand plan be stopped just because of Sure Lulan's objection? The thing that made everyone speechless the most was that Sure Lulan had even asked Nye Tian to tag along. Wasn't this the same as walking into a trap? "Eighth Miss, since your teacher asked you to come out and find me, he probably has something to tell me." Nye Tian thought for a moment and said, "Why don't we go to your teacher first and ask for his opinion?" Here, it was impossible for Nye Tian to rely on his own strength to obtain Manjusaka and then leave safely. The only person he could trust was the owner of the Buddhist beads. Since the owner of the prayer beads was aware of his existence and had even sent Sure Lulan to look for him, it would be pointless for him to hide from her. He might as well take the initiative to meet her. "All right." Sure Lulan's beautiful eyes flickered, but she eventually nodded her head. In order not to expand the target, Nye Tian did not let Cher and the others come out of the Nine Superbs. Instead, he let them continue to stay in the Nine Superbs. Next, Nye Tian and Sure Lulan did not waste any time and immediately left to meet Sure Lulan's teacher. Along the way, Nye Tian and Sure Lulan were extremely careful, avoiding the Sure family's cultivators. It was at this time that Nye Tian truly realized how enormous the scarlet blood sacrificial array was. The entire array not only covered the Cloudy Buddha Peak, but also the entire Cloudy Buddha Sea region. It was hard to imagine how much manpower and resources had been spent to construct such a complex array. This scarlet blood sacrificial array is actually a saint array. The Ghost Emperor couldn't help but exclaim after a more detailed observation of the array. "That can't be right?" Nye Tian was stunned for a moment before he said, "Isn't a saint array something that can only be constructed by a saint array master? Could it be that there is a saint array master in the Cloudy Buddha family? Who says that a saint array must be constructed by a saint array master?" The Ghost Emperor chuckled and said, "As long as there is a complete diagram of a saint array, even a low-level array master can construct a saint array. However, the process will be very slow and there is a possibility of failure. At this time, Fat Cat also nodded and said, "The Cloudy Buddhishire family must have failed countless times to construct this Saint Array, otherwise it wouldn't have taken millions of years." Nyetian couldn't help but nod silently when he heard Fat Cat's words. According to Huairu, the Cloudy Buddhishire family had gone into seclusion several million years ago. It was likely that they had begun constructing the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array after taking control of the Sea of Bitterness horizon. This grand array took millions of years to construct. One had to admit that the people of the Cloudy Buddhishire family were really persistent. However, once this Saint Array was completed and activated, it would open a path to a Saint world. This result was undoubtedly very tempting. A family using millions of years to enter a Saint world was something that any family would do. It's just up ahead. Several hours later, Shi Lulan pointed at a lone peak in the distance and said with some excitement, "Teacher is on Zen first peak." "All right." Nie Tian nodded and prepared to go there immediately. He really wanted to see what this friend of Huairu's was like. Boom. However, at this time, the surrounding void suddenly sank, and a majestic force whistled over, pressing down on Nie Tian and Shi Lulan. "Careful!" Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and he immediately reacted. Sword intent surged out from his body, and a towering sword momentum rose from the ground and surged into the sky. At the same time, the starlight heaven slash appeared in his hand, and he slashed at the sky. The sword moved like a dragon, and sword shadows roared and collapsed. Rumble! In the next instant, the void exploded, and the space trembled as a violent force spread out in the air. Feeling the tremendous force pressing down on him, Nie Tian's eyes flashed with a sharp light. He immediately activated the golden sky armor, enveloping both him and Shi Lulan. Bang! Then, the tremendous force fell, and with a muffled sound, Nie Tian's body swayed. The ground under his feet instantly cracked, and everything around him collapsed. His body swayed a little, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. "Are you all right?" Shi Lulan asked anxiously when she saw that Nie Tian was injured. "I'm fine." Nie Tian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were extremely gloomy as he looked up at the sky. A white-robed figure stood in the air, his aura surging, and his eyes sharp and murderous as he stared at Nie Tian. Rank 5 Demi-Saint. Nie Tian's eyes darkened as he looked at the white-robed figure, and he exclaimed in his heart. This martial artist was actually a rank 5 Demi-Saint, and his aura was even stronger than Shi Lingfeng's. You do have some tricks up your sleeve. No wonder even third brother couldn't catch you. That was when the white-robed martial artist spoke with a cold smile. Fourth brother. At that moment, Shi Lulan stared at the white-robed martial artist, and her beautiful eyes trembled as she cried out in surprise. The white-robed martial artist who had appeared in front of Nie Tian and Shi Lulan was none other than Shi Lulan's fourth brother, Shi Bailey. More importantly, this Shi Bailey had a nickname in the Cloud Buddhishire family. Lunatic Bailey. Chapter 2907. Smarter than you. When Shi Lulan saw that the person who attacked was actually Shi Bailey, her beautiful eyes flickered for a moment, and her face instantly stiffened. She did not expect that Shi Bailey would actually appear. Shi Bailey looked at Nie Tian, his eyes emitting a cold light, and his killing intent was extremely dense. He was very curious. How could a mere third-step half-saint cause the Shi clan patriarch to mobilize the entire clan to capture him? As for the rumors about Nie Tian, he did not believe them at all. Using blood qi to stimulate the blossoming of Manjusaka was something that was simply impossible. How could an outsider do something that even the Cloud Buddhishire clan could not do? What a troublesome opponent! Nie Tian looked at Shi Bailey, his face expressionless as he muttered, "It's good that you know how troublesome it is." Shi Bailey sneered, and his figure moved. In an instant, his entire body's aura was unleashed, and the surrounding space actually became filled with quicksand, like a raging wave, causing the space to fall into a state of chaos. Fourth brother, don't kill him. Sir Lulan stood up and shouted at the top of her lungs, despite the violent shockwaves. Scram! However, Sir Bailey roared, not caring about Sir Lulan's existence at all. He slammed his palm down, and a huge palm of quicksand appeared in the sky, like a falling mountain, crashing down towards Nie Tian and Sir Lulan. This madman! Nie Tian's eyes trembled and he roared. This Sir Bailey was simply a madman. He did not even care about his own sister. Get out of the way! Nie Tian screamed and immediately stretched out his hand. A wave of energy surged out, wrapping around Sir Lulan, and pulled her back. 9 limits of starry sky, heaven slash. In the next moment, the sword intent that he had accumulated in his body suddenly erupted, and he slashed out with his sword. The sword's shadow was like a huge tree that was uprooted from the ground, extending towards the sky, and a dazzling sword light surged out. Rumble! In midair, a violent explosion sounded, and the endless quicksand actually contained a terrifying devouring power, as though it could devour everything. Bang! High up in the sky, Sher Bailey's gaze froze. One of his hands suddenly clenched, and the giant hand of quicksand moved along with him, firmly grasping the giant sword that was charging towards the sky. Nie Tian saw this scene and couldn't help but frown. He didn't expect Sher Bailey's methods to be so strange. Trash like an ant wants to contend against me? Sher Bailey laughed coldly. Then, he suddenly exerted his strength. A terrifying sound was heard in the air. The huge sword shadow was actually forcefully broken by the giant quicksand hand. Nie Tian's eyes darkened as he retreated. Sher Bailey's power had far exceeded his expectations. Not only was this fellow stronger than Sher Lingfeng, but his methods were even more vicious and bizarre. Die! But at this time, Sher Bailey suddenly shouted. His palms suddenly flipped, and the giant quicksand hand formed into a sharp claw, directly grabbing at Nie Tian. A pair of astral soul wings appeared behind Nie Tian's back. Both wings instantly folded, and his silhouette didn't retreat. Instead, he advanced, like an arrow released from a bow, directly rushing over. What are you doing? Sher Lulan saw Nie Tian rushing over, and her beautiful eyes suddenly trembled as she cried out in fear. She didn't expect that Nie Tian would actually be so ferocious. Seeing this scene, Sher Bailey's eyes couldn't help but tremble. He was incomparably shocked, and at the same time, a perverted excitement appeared on his face. Bang! But at this moment, Nie Tian's silhouette forcibly broke through the giant quicksand hand, creating a hole in it. His entire person was like a sharp arrow, fiercely shooting over. Bone-eroding soul shackling chains, come out. In midair, the corners of Nie Tian's mouth twitched as he muttered. Suddenly, 9 bone-eroding soul chains appeared and condensed into a single soul chain in midair. It was like a giant snake that suddenly attacked Sher Bailey with killing intent. Sher Bailey frowned and immediately reacted. A layer of quicksand appeared around his body, condensing into a quicksand shield that enveloped his entire body. Bang! In the next instant, the soul-shackling chain descended, heavily bombarding Sher Bailey's body. The quicksand shield around his body was broken, and his entire person was sent flying 1,000 meters away. Although his strength was very strong in that instant, he didn't even have the time to react. In such a hurry, he only reacted instinctively. Hence, the quicksand shield didn't have much defensive power, and was actually broken by Nie Tian. How is this possible? Below, Sher Lulan saw this scene, and her beautiful face froze. Her entire person was shocked to the extreme. She would never have imagined that Nie Tian would actually counterattack in a situation of absolute death, and even force Sher Bailey to retreat. But in the next instant, her small face became extremely ugly to behold. Sher Bailey was Lunatic Bailey. That attack of Nye Tian's had definitely completely infuriated him. Once Lunatic Bailey was enraged, the following battle would definitely be a fight to the death. How could Shi Lulan not see that Nye Tian had forced Shi Baili to retreat because of his skill and carelessness? If they really fought to the death, Nye Tian definitely wouldn't be Shi Baili's match. Nye Tian stabilized his body in midair, and his expression didn't look too good. The difference in strength between him and Shi Baili was indeed too great. Previously, he could face Shi Lingfeng head-on without being at a disadvantage, and that was because he had borrowed the power of Manjusaka. But now, there was no Manjusaka around, and Shi Baili's strength was even stronger than Shi Lingfeng's. Under such circumstances, facing Shi Baili head-on was tantamount to seeking death. Interesting. Shi Baili stabilized his body, and his eyes stared coldly at Nye Tian. He said, "I never thought that I, Shi Baili, would meet someone crazier than me today." He had suffered a direct attack from the bone-eroding soul-shackling chain, but he wasn't injured, and Nye Tian's strong counterattack made him feel very surprised and excited. What was the point of a prey that didn't know how to resist? "I'm not crazier than you, I'm smarter than you," Nye Tian said with a faint smile. "Is that so?" Shi Baili smiled coldly, and the aura around his body surged. It was even more violent than before, and he said coldly, "Brat, even if you're really smart, so what? In front of true strength, can intelligence save your life?" As he spoke, Shi Baili ruthlessly slammed his palm down. Instantly, the violent palm force crashed down, and the void suddenly sank, as if it was about to collapse. In an instant, quicksand filled the sky, and the heavens and earth turned dark. Nye Tian's eyes turned slightly cold, and he didn't dare to be careless. The sword will around his body was released crazily, and at the same time, there was a surge of blood chi. Shi Baili's palm was even more terrifying than before, and it was slammed down forcefully. There was no way to avoid it, and one could only face it head-on. It was obvious that Shi Baili wanted to kill Nye Tian with one palm. But how could Nye Tian just sit there and wait for his death? Proud sword art, forbidden sword, blood devours the heavens. In the next instant, Nye Tian let out a low roar, and the sword will around his body condensed crazily. Outside his body, a 10,000-meter-long blood-colored sword shadow appeared. It was as majestic as a mountain, and as vast as the sea. Rumble! Two terrifying forces collided in midair, and the void suddenly sank. The heavens and earth were filled with killing intent, and the wind and clouds changed color. Chapter 2908. Crack, crack, crack. Boom. In midair, countless cracking sounds could be heard. The huge sword shadow finally could not hold on any longer and crumbled, turning into streaks of sword will that rushed into the space. Die! Shi Baili's eyes trembled and he roared. His eyes were filled with murderous intent as he pressed down with his palm. It was obvious that he wanted to kill Nye Tian. Although the Shi family patriarch had ordered to capture Nye Tian alive, Shi Baili did not care at all. He wanted to kill Nye Tian right away. Even though Nye Tian's strike hadn't hurt him, it had enraged him and made him feel humiliated. Therefore, Nye Tian must die. Boom! However, just as the fatal palm was about to land, a powerful force suddenly whizzed out and blocked the palm. Shi Baili's eyes darkened and his expression turned ugly. He looked up into the sky and saw a figure in gray robes. "It's you, Wei Kong." Shi Baili's eyes trembled slightly when he saw the figure in gray robes. He did not expect Wei Kong to suddenly appear. "Senior brother." Shi Lulan's beautiful eyes flashed with surprise when she saw the figure in gray robes. The gray-robed man was none other than her senior brother, Wei Kong. Her master only accepted 2 students, Wei Kong and her. Moreover, Wei Kong was one of the few people in the Shi family of Cloud Buddha who did not have the surname Shi. Nye Tian steadied himself and looked up at Wei Kong. He could not help but narrow his eyes. Wei Kong looked younger than Shi Baili, but his strength was actually stronger than Sher Bailey's. He was a stage 6 demi-saint. In the next moment, Sher Bailey calmed down and growled, "Wei Kong, get out of my way!" However, Wei Kong did not seem to hear him at all, nor did he see him. Instead, he turned around to look at Sher Lulan and said, "Junior sister, let's go. Master is still waiting." Sher Lulan nodded and turned to look at Sher Bailey. "Fourth brother, let's go." Nie Tian could not help but smile when he saw this scene. He turned around and was ready to leave with Wei Kong. Impudent! At this time, Sher Bailey let out a furious roar. He was obviously enraged as he shouted, "Wei Kong, how dare you ignore me?" Wei Kong heard Sher Bailey's roar, but he still didn't react. It was obvious that he didn't care about Sher Bailey at all. "Bastard!" Sher Bailey roared. He could no longer control himself. His figure moved, and he immediately attacked. Boom! Suddenly, the sand in the air shot up into the sky and turned into a giant all that attacked Wei Kong. "Senior brother, watch out!" Sher Lulan couldn't help but cry out when she saw this scene. Her face stiffened in fright. However, Wei Kong remained calm and composed. When the quicksand cone was about to hit him, he suddenly turned around and a huge black saber appeared in his hand. He raised his hand and slashed horizontally with his saber. Boom! The moment the saber appeared, a terrible roar resounded in the air, and then a saber shadow whistled out, unexpectedly in the shape of a demonic dragon, roaring and tumbling in the air, forcibly smashing the giant quicksand cone into pieces. Pung! Immediately after, a muffled sound came from the air. Sher Bailey's figure retreated a few thousand meters. After he stabilized himself, a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. His face was as pale as paper, and his eyes were filled with shock. He obviously didn't expect Wei Kang's strength to be so terrifying. "Don't bother me anymore," Wei Kong said coldly. He then turned around and left, not even lifting his head to look at Sher Bailey. Nie Tian couldn't help but frown. The corner of his mouth curled into a bitter smile. He thought to himself, "This senior brother of 8th young mistress is so strong." It had to be said that Wei Kang's strength had indeed exceeded Nie Tian's expectations. He originally thought that even if Wei Kang's cultivation was higher than Sher Bailey's, the battle between the two of them should be about the same. He didn't expect that Wei Kang's strength would be able to completely crush Sher Bailey. Sher Bailey stood there, his body trembling slightly. He was extremely angry. He had never suffered such humiliation in his life. "Wei Kong, do you know that the silver warrior you are protecting is someone that the Lord clan leader wants to capture? By protecting him, you are going against the Cloud Buddha Sher clan." At this moment, Sher Bailey said coldly. He actually started to use the Cloud Buddha Sher clan to pressure Wei Kong. No matter how arrogant he was, the exchange just now had made him understand that he was not Wei Kang's match. Therefore, he could only use the Cloud Buddha Sher clan to pressure Wei Kong. "The person I am protecting is the person that Master is looking for," Wei Kong replied coldly. He didn't even put Sher Bailey's threat in his eyes. He didn't even turn his head. Nie Tian and Sher Lulan followed behind Wei Kong and left in big strides. "Damn it!" Sher Bailey looked at the three figures. He was furious, but he didn't dare to chase after them. After half a day, he exploded and roared like a wild beast. "Great Elder, what are you doing?" After a while, Sher Bailey calmed down a little. His eyes trembled as he asked coldly. Wei Kong and Sher Lulan's master was the Sher clan's great elder, Sher Chani. In the Cloud Buddha Sher clan, other than the patriarch, there was also an elder council, and Sher Chani was the clan's first elder. Sher Chani's status in the Cloud Buddha Sher clan was not lower than the patriarch, Sher Donglai. In fact, most families and forces would have an elder council. The purpose of its existence was to keep the patriarch in check and balance, to prevent one person from dominating the clan. Nie Tian was the person that Sher Donglai wanted to capture, and now, he had become the person that Sher Chani wanted to see. QL11. In the blink of an eye, Nye Tian had become the most important person in the Sher clan. Of the two strongest people in the Sher clan, one wanted to capture him, and the other wanted to see him. That silver brat, who is he? Sher Bai Li's eyes shone with a cold light as he asked in a heavy tone. He didn't linger, but left immediately, preparing to report everything that happened here to the Patriarch. At the same time, under Wei Kang's lead, Nye Tian and Sher Lulan were heading towards Diana Peak. This senior brother, many thanks for your help just now. Nye Tian smiled faintly, taking a step forward to express his gratitude to Wei Kang. Just now, if it wasn't for Wei Kang's timely intervention, Nye Tian would have been struck by Sher Bai Li's palm. Although he wouldn't have died, he would have been heavily injured. Therefore, a word of thanks was appropriate. I was only acting on Master's orders, you don't need to thank me. Unexpectedly, Wei Kang's reaction was very calm, even cold. Nye Tian was stunned, feeling a little awkward. He smiled bitterly in his heart. Looks like this powerful senior brother is not easy to deal with. Don't mind him, senior brother is just like this, he treats everyone the same. Sher Lulan, who was at the side, glanced at Nye Tian and said in a low voice. Nye Tian smiled faintly, not feeling anything. Who asked Wei Kang to be so powerful? We're here. A short while later, Nye Tian and the rest arrived at Diana Peak. Wei Kang pointed at a valley in front of them and said to Nye Tian, "Go in, Master is waiting for you inside." Nye Tian looked at the valley in front of him, his divine sense probing it, but he couldn't help feeling puzzled. He didn't sense any aura. Chapter 2909. Sher clan's ancestor, yes. Wei Kang and Sher Lulan exchanged a glance when they heard the voice coming from the valley. Then, they bowed in unison, replying respectfully. Following that, the two of them entered the valley together with Nye Tian. Inside the valley, it was a vast expanse of emptiness. There was nothing in sight except for a weathered old man standing at the center of the valley. His back was hunched, and he held a dragon-headed walking stick. His body trembled as if a gust of wind would topple him over. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed as he looked at the weathered old man. His heart trembled slightly. The old man's face was filled with the vicissitudes of life. Although his eyes were dull and murky, if one were to look carefully, they seemed to contain everything and see through everything. Moreover, Nye Tian did not feel the slightest fluctuation of aura from the old man. It was as if the person standing in front of him was an ordinary old man. However, these were not the most important things. The most important thing was that this old man's appearance was extremely similar to Huairu's. Could it be that Elder Hua is related to this person? Nye Tian frowned as he couldn't help but wonder. The two of them looked so similar that Nye Tian couldn't help but think about it. "Young man, how should I address you?" The weathered old man, Sher Chani, stared at Nye Tian and asked with a faint smile. His tone was calm, as if he was talking about family matters, giving off an amiable feeling. "This junior is Nye Tian." Nye Tian nodded slightly, bowing slightly to show his respect. He was extremely curious about the relationship between Sher Chani and Huairu. Nye Tian, a good name. Sher Chani laughed as he stretched out his hand. His old and wrinkled palm resembled the bark of a tree. Nye Tian was taken aback for a moment before he realized that Sher Chani wanted the string of prayer beads. He quickly took it out and handed it over to Sher Chani. "Teacher, don't tell me this is the Sher clan's." Wei Kang's eyes flickered when he saw the string of prayer beads. He seemed to want to say something, but after taking a glance at Nye Tian, he swallowed his words. "That's right, this is one of the 3 sacred objects of the Sher clan, the Great Wish Bodhi beads." Sher Chani didn't hide anything. Nye Tian looked at Sher Chani and his eyes narrowed. His expression was very strange. He didn't expect that ordinary-looking prayer beads to be one of Sher clan's 3 holy artifacts. What puzzled him even more was that after Sher Chan received the Great Wish Bodhi bead, his complexion had changed. It was as if he had become a different person. His face was ruddy and he seemed younger. Even his body was not as stooped as before. He was flabbergasted, not knowing what was going on. Faintly, he guessed that there must be a connection between the Great Wish Bodhi bead and Shirchani. There was one more thing that he could not understand. Why was one of the 3 sacred objects of the Shir clan, the Great Wish Bodhi bead, in Huairu's possession? What was the relationship between Huairu and the Cloud Buddha sect? And at this time, Shirchani suddenly looked at Nye Tian, hesitated for a moment, and finally said, "Ancestor Iru, is he okay?" When Nye Tian heard Shirchani's words, he couldn't help but be stunned for a long time. He thought he had heard wrong. Shirchani actually said Ancestor Iru. Could it be that this Ancestor Iru was Huairu? But this was too far-fetched. Although Huairu looked very old, he was definitely younger than Shirchani. Nye Tian, don't be confused. The Ancestor Iru that this old man is talking about is the person who gave you the prayer bead. Shirchani looked at Nye Tian and said with a strange smile. This. Nye Tian's face was filled with astonishment. He froze on the spot, unable to react for a long time. How could he have imagined that Huairu was the ancestor of the Cloud Buddha Shir clan? Nye Tian had never been clear about Huairu's age, but judging from his appearance, Huairu should be around 400,000 years old. But now he knew that Huairu was definitely more than 400,000 years old, perhaps even more than 4 million years old. The Cloud Buddha Shir clan had lived in seclusion at the Sea of Bitterness for millions of years. As the ancestor of the Cloud Buddha Shir clan, it was really difficult to guess Huairu's true age. Generally speaking, even a peak pseudo-divine realm master only had a maximum lifespan of 1 million years. It was very unusual for Huairu to live for so long. Perhaps this was related to his identity as a star messenger. If Huairu was the ancestor of the Cloud Buddha Shir clan, then it was easy to explain why he had the Great Wish Bodhi bead in his hand. However, Nye Tian had another question in his heart. Since Huairu was the ancestor of the Shir clan, why didn't Huairu come when the Cloud Buddha Shir clan lived in seclusion at the Sea of Bitterness? Nye Tian, Ancestor Iru, has his own difficulties. The Cloud Buddha Shir clan does not blame him. At this time, Shirchani sighed, his eyes looking at Nye Tian. His cloudy eyes unexpectedly released a sharp light as he said, "It seems that you are the person Ancestor Iru has been looking for." Nye Tian furrowed his eyebrows and let out a stiff laugh. It seemed that Shirchani even knew about the star origin stone. Wasn't the person Huairu was looking for the future star Saint Lord? Huairu probably didn't come to the Sea of Bitterness cliff because he was looking for Nye Tian. The Great Wish Bodhi bead is one of the Shir clan's 3 sacred objects. If it wasn't for the person he trusts the most, it would be impossible for Ancestor Iru to give the bead to someone else. Shirchani smiled faintly. "I will say this much." As he spoke, he looked at Nye Tian and asked, "How much do you know about the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array?" "A little," Nye Tian nodded, then glanced at Shir Lulan and said, "I've already told her." "Teacher, is what he said true?" Shir Lulan's beautiful eyes suddenly trembled. "Father really wants to use the blood of the Sea Lords to open the Scarlet Blood path?" "It's true." Shirchani nodded. His eyes couldn't help but flicker as if he was very surprised. The latter had only arrived at the Cloud Buddha Peak for a short time, but he had already seen through the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array. "It's true." Shir Lulan was startled, her face filled with shock. She immediately reacted and shouted, "I want to stop Father." With that, she turned around and wanted to leave, but Wei Kong stretched out his hand to stop her. "Lulan, calm down first. Let Master finish." Shirchani waved his hand, indicating for Shir Lulan to calm down. He then looked at Nye Tian and asked him to repeat what he knew. Nye Tian nodded and repeated what he knew about the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array. "You know a lot, but not everything." Shirchani shook his head with a bitter smile after listening to Nye Tian. The Shur clan has been preparing for the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array for millions of years. To open the entire array, the blood of 100 Sea Lords is far from enough. Far from enough. Nye Tian frowned and exclaimed. Shur Chani nodded solemnly. The blood of the Sea Lords is used to open the array for the first time. Once the array is activated, it will continuously absorb Manjasaka's power. And during this period, a large amount of blood sacrifice is needed. This. Nye Tian frowned, stunned for a moment, then said in shock, the entire cliff of the Sea of Bitterness only has 108 Sea Lords. They are all dead, so where will the blood sacrifice come from? What do you think? Shur Chani's eyes darkened as he asked. Chapter 29:10. Blood sacrifice. The activation of the Scarlet Blood Path required a large amount of blood. Just the blood of 100 Sea Lords was obviously not enough. Then where would the other blood come from? Other than the Shur family's cultivators, Nye Tian could not think of a second possibility. Shur family's cultivators. Wei Kong and Shur Liulan's expressions stiffened when they heard Nye Tian's words. In order to open the Scarlet Blood Path, the Shur family's patriarch was going to sacrifice his own clansmen? Using the blood of his own clan as a sacrifice, how cruel and merciless. That's the only possibility. Shur Chani nodded solemnly, his eyes trembling slightly. One could imagine the shock in his heart. Other than using the blood of his own clan as a sacrifice, he could not think of any other possibility. Moreover, the blood of the Shur family's cultivators originally contained the power of Manjasaka. Using it to stimulate Manjasaka was just right. However, this method was too cruel. Master, Lord Patriarch is really going to use the blood of the Shur family to open the Scarlet Blood Path? After a while, Wei Kong calmed down and asked in a low voice. N. Shur Chani nodded, his expression extremely solemn as he said, You must think that this method of sacrificing one's own clansmen is too cruel. But the opening of the Scarlet Blood Path is not just this. What do you mean? Nye Tian's eyes narrowed, his heart suddenly sinking. Could it be that the opening of the Scarlet Blood Path would cause even more serious consequences? The opening of the Scarlet Blood Path will open the legendary passage to the sacred world of Samsara. That is the gate to a sacred world. When the entrance is opened, a huge gap will be torn between heaven and earth. Shur Chani said solemnly, and that kind of space-time crack will cause space-time to collapse on a large scale. At that time, a space-time black hole will appear at the entrance to the sacred world of Samsara. The power of a space-time black hole is so strong that it can easily swallow the entire Sea of Bitterness cliff. Even the entire Saint's soul domain will be directly swallowed. After saying this, Shur Chani's eyes trembled slightly, his face extremely gloomy. After listening, Nye Tian couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. So, once the Scarlet Blood Path is opened, the Sea of Bitterness cliff will be destroyed, and the entire Saint Spirit region will be destroyed. He had never thought that a Scarlet Blood sacrificial array would have such serious consequences. This is too crazy. Wei Kong was stunned for a long time before he finally reacted and said heavily. Shur Liulan's pretty face was frozen in place, as if she was petrified. The Scarlet Blood sacrificial array required the fresh blood of the Shur family to be used as a sacrifice. Once it was activated, the entire shore of the Bitter Sea would be buried along with it. It might even threaten the existence of the Saint Soul region. The consequences were too great. The Scarlet Blood sacrificial array could be called a bloody sacrificial array. I only found out about this recently. Furthermore, even if the Scarlet Blood Path really opens, there will definitely be very few people who will have the opportunity to enter the Samsara sacred world. Just the powerful space-time pressure at the entrance to the sacred world is not something an ordinary person can withstand, Shur Chani said with a solemn expression. Since the price of the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array is so great, why does the Patriarch still want to open the Scarlet Blood Path? Wei Kang's brows furrowed as he asked in a low voice. The temptation of the sacred world is enough to make a person go crazy, Sher Chani sighed, a helpless expression on his face. Teacher, can you use the power of the Elders' Council to stop the Patriarch? Wei Kong took a step forward and asked. Sher Chani shook his head and sighed. Wei Kong, you are too naive. The other elders of the Elders' Council have already stood on the Patriarch's side. They also want to enter the legendary sacred world of reincarnation. Wei Kang's face stiffened, unable to say anything. Teacher, are we just going to watch a tragedy happen? Sher Lulan had also calmed down a little, a look of grief on her face. We must stop the opening of the Scarlet Blood Path. Sher Chani's eyes were resolute as he said, even if we have to destroy the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array, we will not hesitate. Teacher, what should we do? Wei Kang's eyes flashed with a bright light as he asked excitedly. Sher Chani's eyes darkened, then he glanced at Nie Tian. A scroll appeared in his hand, and he handed it over. Senior, what is this? Nie Tian couldn't help but frown as he received the scroll. You will know when you open it, Sher Chani said lightly. Nie Tian nodded, then opened the scroll in his hand. It turned out to be a diagram of an array. This is the diagram of the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array. Although Nie Tian's attainments in array formations were very low, he could still see that the diagram in his hand was very similar to the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array. Yes. Sher Chani nodded slightly. The Scarlet Blood sacrificial array was built by the Sher family over millions of years. I don't know how much manpower and resources they spent. If we want to stop the Scarlet Blood path from opening, we must destroy the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array. This grand formation is a sacred formation. It's simply impossible to destroy it from the outside. Therefore, you must enter the inner part of the array. More accurately, you must enter the holy array's eye, destroy the eye, and destroy the array. At this point, Sher Chani's eyes flashed with excitement. He pointed to an area on the diagram and said, This old man has studied the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array for a long time, but I can only confirm that the eye is in this area. As for where it is, I don't know. Nie Tian looked at the diagram and said in a deep voice, Senior wants me to enter the eye and destroy the array? He didn't think that Sher Chani would be so righteous as to really want to destroy the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array. It has to be known that this array was the work of the Cloud Buddha Sher family for millions of years. Yes. Sher Chani nodded. Nie Tian, you are the only one who can approach the eye of the array. Why? Nie Tian's brows furrowed as he asked in surprise. The eye of the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array is a terrifying restriction formed by Manjasaka's power. Your martial body is special and your bloodline is powerful. You have the highest chance of breaking through this powerful restriction, Sher Chani said as he looked at Nie Tian. Nie Tian's expression changed slightly. After thinking for a moment, he nodded. He had originally come for Manjasaka, but the matter of the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array could threaten the existence of the entire Saint Soul domain, so he had no choice but to intervene. Wei Kong, Lu Lan, the two of you follow Nie Tian and support him from the side. You must let him enter the eye of the holy array, Sher Chani said solemnly as he turned to Wei Kong and Sher Lulan. Okay, Sher Lulan said decisively. But Wei Kong hesitated for a moment before nodding. He couldn't understand why Sher Chani would entrust such an important matter to someone he had only met once. Although he was puzzled, he didn't dare go against Sher Chani's orders. In his life, the person he respected the most was his master. Chapter 29:11. 7 Nights Demon Dragon, prepare yourselves, we'll depart immediately, Sher Chani said with a faint smile when he saw Wei Kong and Sher Lulan agree. Master, what about you? Wei Kong frowned, unable to stop himself from asking. Nie Tian was also taken aback, a strange expression on his face. Could it be that Sher Chani wasn't going with them? Master wants to stay, we can't let Sher Donglai kill the Sher family's cultivators like sacrificial offerings, Sher Chani sighed, his aged face becoming even more solemn. Master, you. Wei Kang's eyes narrowed when he heard that Shi Chani wanted to stay, but the latter waved his hand to stop him. Wei Kong, Master knows what you're worried about. Shi Chani forced a smile, saying, Master is the Shi family's grand elder after all, and with the Great Wish Buddhist beads in hand, even Shi Donglai may not be able to defeat Master. But Wei Kang's face was full of worry. After all, the Shi family's patriarch, Shi Donglai, was the only false divine master in the entire sea of bitterness. There are no buts. Shi Chani's face darkened, saying, You should depart now. Remember, you only have 3 days. 3 days. Wei Kong hesitated, but in the end he nodded. Senior, take care. Nye Tian looked deeply at Shi Chani, saying one last word before turning to leave. Wei Kong and Shi Lulan followed behind him, the 3 figures quickly disappearing from Shi Chani's sight. The survival of the entire Saint's soul domain rests on the 3 of you. Don't disappoint this old man. Shi Chani looked in the direction the 3 figures disappeared in, letting out a long sigh. Nye Tian's group of 3 quickly left Chani Peak, heading towards a place called Chest Height Valley. According to the Scarlet Blood Sacrificial Arrays diagram, there was a cave in Chest Height Valley that led to the bottom of the Cloud Buddha mountain range. From there, it was the fastest way to reach the Holy Formation's eye. Nye Tian had the diagram in his hands, and there were Ghost Emperor and Fat Cat, 2 formation masters by his side, so he felt much more at ease. The 3 of them moved cautiously, avoiding the Shi family's searchers. About a few hours later, the 3 of them finally arrived outside of the Chest Height Valley. Before entering the valley, Nye Tian spread out his divine sense and sensed the valley. He immediately discovered a dozen or so auras, and one of them was extremely powerful, even more powerful than Wei Kong. Oh no, it's second brother guarding this place. Shi Lulan's beautiful eyes flickered as she said in a low voice. Shi Wui. Wei Kang's brows creased into a deep frown. He is indeed a difficult opponent. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. It seemed like both Shi Lulan and Wei Kong knew the guardians of the Chest Width Valley. 8th young miss, how strong is your second brother compared to your third brother and fourth brother? Nye Tian looked at Shi Lulan and asked in a deep voice. Among the younger generation of Shi clan, second brother is the strongest. Even eldest brother is not a match for second brother. Third brother and fourth brother may be strong, but in front of second brother, they may not even have the chance to attack. Shi Lulan's beautiful eyes flickered as she said with an ugly expression. She hadn't expected that the guardian of the Chest Width Valley would be Shi Wui. Hearing Shi Lulan's words, Nye Tian couldn't help but frown. He pondered for a moment and said, We can't barge in, let's find another entrance. Saying that, he prepared to leave. No! But at this time, Wei Kong shouted in a low voice. His eyes were solemn as he looked at Nye Tian and said, We don't have much time. This entrance is the fastest way to the eye of the formation. We'll enter from here. He remembered Shi Chani's words in his heart. They only had 3 days. But my second brother. Shi Lulan's brows were tightly knitted together, her face filled with worry. Leave Shi Wui to me. Before Shi Lulan could finish, Wei Kong interjected. Wei Kong, are you confident? Nye Tian looked at Wei Kong, unable to conceal the worry in his eyes. He had to admit that Wei Kong was strong, but from Shi Lulan's description of Shi Wui, it was obvious that Shi Wui was stronger. I will do my best. Wei Kong nodded solemnly. His silhouette flickered as he flew towards the valley in front of him. Nye Tian frowned, but he could only follow after Wei Kong. Since Wei Kong had already made his move, he could only try his best. He could only hope that Wei Kang's strength wouldn't disappoint them. Wei Kong. Right at this time, a low shout came from the valley, followed by a furious roar. You've got guts! You actually dare to barge into the Chest Height Valley? Do you know that this is a forbidden area? The low and violent voice was filled with a domineering aura. It was Sherwui. At this time, Wei Kang's silhouette was hovering in the air. Cold eyes were fixed on Sherwui, and he didn't waste any words. Do it. Sherwui's face sank and he asked in a cold tone, You really want to barge into the Chest Height Valley? Yes, Wei Kang replied. His body shook and the saber intent around him surged. A black saber appeared in his hand, and a black saber light shrouded his entire body, giving him a domineering appearance. Good. Sherwui's eyes widened as he felt the saber intent around Wei Kang's body. There was a hint of excitement in his voice as he said, I heard that you're the last orphan of the 7 Knights Wei family. Even the Grand Elder praised your strength. Today, I, Sherwui, would like to experience whether your 7 Knights Wei family is stronger, or my Cloud Buddha family is stronger. As soon as he finished speaking, Sherwui's body blossomed with a crimson light. Rays of light that resembled blood circulated in the air, condensing into a blood-red flower outside his body. Manjasaka! The other Sher family's cultivators' eyes widened, and they cried out in horror. What Sherwui released at this moment was the Sher family's bloodline power, Manjasaka. Most of the Sher family's cultivators had the power of Manjasaka in their bodies, but those like Sherwui, who could directly condense the scarlet blood shadow of Manjasaka, were few and far between. In the entire Sher family, the number of people who could display the power of Manjasaka to this degree could be counted on one hand. Sherwui, you're truly worthy of being the Sher family's strongest among the younger generation. Wei Kang's eyes darkened, and the black saber in his hand, the 7 Knights' demonic dragon emitted a sharp cry, causing the void to tremble. In the next moment, a giant shadow of a demonic dragon appeared outside Wei Kang's body, as dark as the night sky. In an instant, the entire Chest High Valley became as dark as night. 7 Knights' demonic dragon. Sherwui's eyes trembled slightly, and he couldn't help exclaiming in shock. Then, he burst into laughter. Very good, to be able to see the legendary 7 Knights' demonic dragon, I, Sherwui, will definitely fight you. The Cloud Buddha family and the 7 Knights Wei family, these 2 great ancient races, were actually going to battle again after so many years. Between Manjasaka and the 7 Knights' demonic dragon, which one had the stronger bloodline power? At this time, Nye Tian and Sher Liulan's figures appeared, and seeing the scene in front of them, their eyes couldn't help but tremble. Chapter 29:12 Bloodline Battle. Not many people knew that the Cloud Buddha clan and the 7 Knight Wei clan were part of the 4 foreign clans. A long time ago, the 2 clans had a bloodline battle. The battle between the Manjasaka and the 7 Knight demonic dragon had shocked the heavens and earth. Who would have thought that countless years after the decline of the 4 great outsider races, the bloodline war between the 2 great outsider races would take place again in the hands of 2 juniors? Compared to the 7 Knight Wei clan, the Cloud Buddha clan was much better. That was because Wei Kang was the last orphan of the 7 Knight Wei clan. Wei Kang, it's impossible for you to stop my Sher clan from opening the Scarlet Blood Path. Sherwui's eyes were filled with killing intent. I, Sherwui, was ordered to guard the Chest Height Valley to guard against sinister people who would try to destroy the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array. Sherwui was naturally aware that there was an entrance to the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array in the valley. In his opinion, Wei Kang was a despicable person who wanted to destroy the array and stop the Cloud Buddha clan from opening the entrance to the Samsara world. Make your move. Wei Kang's gaze was cold and firm. He didn't waste any time and spoke in a heavy tone. Good. Then let me see how strong the legendary 7 Knight demonic dragon is. The corner of Sherwui's mouth curled into a sneer. His silhouette flickered and the Manjasaka's petals bloomed, emitting a scarlet radiance that fluctuated in the air. Wei Kang wasn't the slightest bit afraid. The 7 Knight demonic dragon slash in his hand hummed as a saber light soared into the sky. Boom! The saber light collided with the scarlet halo, and a visible shockwave spread out. The shockwave instantly collided with the surrounding mountain walls and disappeared. Upon seeing this, Nie Tian thought to himself, "It seems that the surrounding mountains are all protected by spell formations. Is this all you've got?" Shi Wui sneered coldly. His eyes were filled with violence and ruthlessness. His silhouette flickered as a red light appeared, akin to the setting sun. In an instant, scarlet light filled the sky, enveloping Wei Kong. Wei Kang's eyes trembled when he felt Shi Wui's powerful attack. Roar! Immediately, he reacted. The seven-night demon dragon outside his body let out a deep dragon roar, causing the entire valley to tremble. Bang! In the next instant, the scarlet light fell and forcefully chopped at the seven-night demon dragon's head. There was a muffled explosion in the air, and a huge impact surged in all directions. Wei Kang's figure instantly retreated several hundred meters. After he stabilized himself, a trace of blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth. In a head-on clash, Huang Xiaolong's strength was slightly weaker than Shi Wui. "Good fight, second young master!" Shi family warriors shouted in unison as they saw this scene. They all knew Wei Kang's identity, so they paid special attention to this battle. If Shi Wui won, it would mean that the Cloud Buddha Shi family's bloodline was stronger than the seven-night Wei family's. Nie Tian looked at Wei Kong and couldn't help but narrow his eyes. In fact, in terms of bloodline power, Shi Wui and Wei Kong weren't too far apart. The only difference between them was their strength. Wei Kong was a demi-saint, while Shi Wui was a demi-saint. For two evenly matched opponents, the difference of a small realm was the difference between life and death. "Nie Tian, don't worry about me. Hurry up and enter the valley," Wei Kong suddenly said in a deep voice. He had realized how powerful Shi Wui was, and he already had a plan in mind. Even if he wasn't Shi Wui's match, it wouldn't be a problem for him to hold him back. Moreover, he was confident that it wouldn't be easy for Shi Wui to kill him. "Okay," Nie Tian nodded and said to Lulan, "Eighth young lady, follow me closely." As he finished speaking, his eyes turned cold. Sword will surged out of his body, and his sword aura burst out like the sea. "Huh!" Shi Wui's eyes trembled when he saw this scene, and he growled, "Stop them." "Yes." The Shi family's warriors nodded in unison. Their figures moved in an instant, and the aura around them became wild. When they linked together, it was like an iron net that blocked Nie Tian and Shi Lulan. These warriors were all demi-saints, and their bloodlines were interlinked. When their auras merged together, they actually had a momentum that could shake the heavens. "Get out of my way!" Shi Lulan roared. Her drizzle mist silver shot out, and a surging sea of sword will surged out, turning into countless tiny sword shadows in the air that exuded an incredibly sharp aura. However, when these countless sword shadows and sharp blades fell down, they had no effect at all, as they were directly blocked by the wall of aura of the Shi family's warriors. "Shi Lulan, what are you doing?" Shi Wui's eyes darkened as he growled in a cold voice. He didn't expect that Shi Lulan would be together with Wei Kong and the others. "Second brother, I must stop the scarlet blood path from opening." Shi Lulan raised her head and looked at Shi Wui, her eyes filled with determination. "What nonsense are you talking about? Do you want to become a traitor of the Shi family?" Shi Wui's face was extremely dark as he shouted in a wild voice. Shi Lulan ignored him, and her petite figure moved once again, charging towards the Shi family's warriors. The Shi family's warriors were naturally aware of Shi Lulan's identity, and so they didn't dare to hurt her. They only defended themselves, since Shi Lulan's strength was not enough to break through their wall of aura. Seven Knights Demon Dragon, Demon Hell Slash. At this time, Wei Kang's figure moved, and the Seven Knights Demon Dragon slashed downwards. Immediately, a black saber intent condensed in the void, condensing into a dragon-shaped saber shadow. Its momentum shook the heavens, and it slashed down towards Shi Wui. Shi Wui suddenly felt a powerful pressure coming from the void, and his eyes narrowed. His body shook, and the scarlet lily around him bloomed once more. A blood-red light spread through the air, covering half the sky in a crimson hue. High up in the sky, red and black collided, swallowing each other. The void trembled, and the entire world fell into chaos as red and black intertwined with each other. Endless energy gushed out like a raging tide, and was absorbed by the array formation on the mountain wall. Soon, the two figures in the sky became clear. They were Wei Kong and Shi Wui. But at this time, Wei Kang's face was deathly pale, and there was a glaring wound on his chest, so deep that his bones could be seen. Looking at Shi Wui, he was completely unharmed. His aura was still as wild as before, and his eyes were filled with killing intent. Wei Kong, is this the 7 Knights Demon Dragon of your Wei clan? It's merely SOSO. Shi Wui sneered. His eyes were filled with provocation, as if victory was already in his grasp. The 7 Knights Wei clan, one of the 4 great clans of the Supreme Ancient Era, had disappointed him. Wei Kong looked at Shi Wui, and after a moment of silence, the corners of his mouth curled up into a strange smile. His smile was very strange, as if he was mocking Shi Wui. Shi Wui's expression sank and he sneered. Wei Kong, are you provoking me with that smile of yours? Shi Wui, our battle hasn't ended yet, Wei Kong said in a low voice. After that, he raised his palm and black runes appeared on his palm, pouring into the 7 Knights Demon Dragon /. 7 Knights Demon Dragon / unseal it. Wei Kang's voice was cold, and he was like a devil god. Chapter 29:13. Night Glow. Night Glow. Shi Wui's eyes darkened when he saw the 7 Knight Demonic Dragon / emitting a ray of darkness. Not even in his wildest dreams did he expect Wei Kong to be able to unseal the 7 Knights' dark glow. Rumor had it that the Wei family's 7 Knights Demonic Dragon bloodline had 7 seals on it, and they were called the 7 Knights Dark Glow, also known as the Night Glow. Every time one of the seals was unsealed, the 7 Knights Demonic Dragon's strength would increase by several times, or even dozens of times. How could Shi Wui have expected Wei Kong to be able to unseal the 7 Knights Dark Glow when he was only a 6th-order demonic saint? In his opinion, this was an impossible feat according to the Shi family's ancestors. The Wei family's 7 Knights Dark Glow could only be unsealed by a peak 9th-order demonic saint. But Wei Kong was only a 6th-order demonic saint. Shi Wui, you're not that stupid after all, Wei Kong said coldly. His long hair fluttered in the air, and his eyes turned as black as the night. He looked like a devil that had just walked out of hell, and the violent aura he exuded seemed capable of destroying everything in its path. Wei Kong, how can this brat be so strong? The Shi family's cultivators looked at Wei Kong in shock, and they couldn't help but cry out. At this moment, Nie Tian's expression couldn't help but change. He didn't expect Wei Kong to actually have such a powerful trump card. Wei Kang's aura had increased by several times compared to before. Previously, Wei Kong couldn't fight Shi Wui, but the current Wei Kong was more than enough to put up a fight. Senior brother, you? Shi Lulan stared at Wei Kong with a shocked expression on her face. Obviously, she had not expected that her senior brother, who she had spent so much time with, would be so terrifying. Wei Kong, so what if you've unsealed the Night Glow? I, Shi Wui, am not afraid of you. At this time, Shi Wui sneered and a scarlet halo surged out from his body, piercing through the void. The Manjusaka around him became even more dazzling, as if it was about to solidify. It was obvious that Shi Wui had concealed his strength in the previous battle. Come, let's have a good fight. Shi Wui laughed maniacally. His silhouette flickered and his aura bloomed. Rays of blood-red light spread out in the air, like sharp blades made of blood. Wherever they passed, space trembled, as though they were about to be torn apart. 7 Knights Demon Dragon, darkness descends. Wei Kang's lips curled into a cold smile as the 7 Knight Demonic Dragon slash in his hand slashed through the air. A dark ray of light appeared and whistled like a dragon, forcibly slicing the blood-colored halo in the air apart. Bang! In the next moment, a muffled bang resounded in the sky. Crimson red and darkness collided once more, and it caused space to tremble. Even though the entire valley was protected by the Grand Formation, it couldn't help but shake violently at this moment. Nie Tian could feel the fluctuations coming from the void below, and his eyes couldn't help but tremble. Shi Wui and Wei Kong were too terrifying. The intensity of the battle had exceeded Nie Tian's expectations. If Wei Kong wasn't here, just a single Shi Wui was more than enough for Nie Tian to deal with. From the strength Shi Wui displayed, even if Nie Tian activated the Holy Soul Curse Mark, he wouldn't be Shi Wui's opponent. Bang! 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 At this time, terrifying sounds of collisions resounded in the air. Crimson red and darkness intertwined, making it seem like the end of the world had arrived. This is the moment. Nie Tian could feel the wall of momentum condensed by the Shi family's cultivators weakening. The corners of his mouth twitched as he spoke in a deep voice. Sacred heaven-defying sword, Earth's sword devours the moon. In the next moment, all the accumulated sword intent in his body erupted. The starlight heavenly slash stabbed out, and a fiery sword light shot out. Rumble! Crack, crack, crack! Following which, the terrifying sword shadow fell and heavily bombarded the wall of aura. The void rumbled, and then a white crack appeared in the air, like a spider's web. Shatter! Nie Tian's eyes flashed with passion at the sight, and he stabbed out again with the starlight heavenly slash. His sword will condensed as vast as a waterfall, and the profound aura of the sword's shadow abruptly burst out. Bang! In the next instant, a dull explosion resounded, and the wall of momentum that dozens of demi-saint cultivators had condensed was forcibly shattered. The Shi family's cultivators all retreated, many of them coughing blood on the spot before gaping at Nie Tian. They never imagined that a mere demi-saint cultivator could actually break through their wall of momentum. Shi Lulan was taken aback, not expecting that Nie Tian would be so ferocious. He is the one the clan leader wants to capture. In the next instant, one of the Shi family's cultivators seemed to have thought of something and shouted loudly. Right. It must be him. The eyes of the others quivered as they quickly followed suit. Nie Tian's combat ability was so powerful that it far surpassed other cultivators of the same level. One could only imagine how powerful his innate gifts were. Who else could it be if not him? The clan leader of the Shi family wanted to capture a silver-haired cultivator. Meanwhile, up above, Shi Wui stared at Nie Tian, his eyes flashing coldly as he growled, "So you are that fellow with such a powerful bloodline. No wonder your combat ability is so powerful." Nie Tian glanced at Shi Wui but did not say a word, and instead turned his eyes to Wei Kong. "All of you go. Leave this to me." Wei Kong nodded grimly, his pitch-black eyes flashing with an unusual dark glint. "All right." Nie Tian answered and did not stay any longer. Sword will burst out from his entire body, turning into a sky full of sword shadows that swirled around him like a hurricane. His figure dashed forward, forcibly pushing aside dozens of Shi family martial artists. Although the martial artists of the Shi family were all demi-saints, their abilities were only at the first or second level, which was why it was not possible for them to stop Nie Tian. Shi Lulan followed closely beside Nie Tian, the two figures darting towards a cave inside the cave like arrows released from a bow. "Damn it!" Shi Wui bellowed, raising his arm and slamming his palm down. Crimson radiance coalesced in the air as a gigantic palm shadow appeared, smashing down towards Nie Tian and Shi Lulan. Nie Tian, who was still in the air, suddenly felt the air sink as a tremendous pressure descended upon him, causing the ground beneath him to shake. Seal of Annihilation, open! At that critical moment, he focused his gaze and formed a seal with his hand. Suddenly, the ground bulged as if there was a wild beast beneath the ground. Endless rocks and dirt condensed together, forming a gigantic palm that slammed towards the sky. Rumble! Two gigantic palms, one real and one illusory, collided with each other. Heaven and earth trembled, sand and stones crumbled, and the earth cracked. Although the seal of annihilation could not stop Shi Wui's palm, it bought Nie Tian some time. Nie Tian seized the opportunity, flapped his wings, and swept Shi Lulan into the cave before him. "Humph! You're not going anywhere!" However, it was at that moment that a low murderous voice rang out. Then, a powerful force whistled through the air, heading straight for Nie Tian and Shi Lulan. The sudden turn of events caused Nie Tian's expression to change. His figure retreated in a frenzy, and he stood still in the air. Chapter 29:14. Chapter 299. Chapter 299 The Demonic Dragon's Lament. It's you. When Nie Tian saw Shi Bailey, his expression darkened and his face turned ugly. They were about to enter the cave, but they were stopped by Shi Bailey. "Brat, we meet again," Shi Bailey said coldly, his eyes filled with killing intent. "Fourth brother, you've come at the right time. You must stop them." Shi Wui shouted loudly as he saw Shi Bailey's figure. "Second brother, don't worry. Leave this brat to me," Shi Bailey replied solemnly. Shi Bailey replied in a deep voice. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he stared at Nie Tian and coldly said, "If I don't kill this brat today, then my name isn't Shi Bailey." Nie Tian's eyes darkened and he said in his heart, "There's no other way. I can only fight with all my strength." Immediately, he looked at Shi Lulan and said, "Eighth young lady, the following battle will be very intense. I'm afraid I won't be able to protect you. I have a small independent world with me. You can enter it first." As he spoke, he took out the 9 extreme treasures and released a space-time light. Shi Lulan's beautiful eyes flickered. She was a little hesitant, but she still nodded and stepped into the 9 extreme treasures. Shi Lulan knew that she was too weak. Even if she stayed by Nie Tian's side, it would be useless. Instead, she would become his burden. "Next, we can have a good fight." Nie Tian kept the 9 extreme treasures and looked at Shi Bailey with a gloomy expression. "Humph! You're just a piece of trash at the 3rd step half-saint realm, and you want to fight me?" Shi Bailey sneered with a gloomy expression. "You'll know once you give it a try," Nie Tian said with a smile. Disdain could be seen in his eyes. "Aunt, you're overestimating yourself." Shi Bailey roared and slammed his palm down. Quicksand filled the sky and covered the sun. Like a tsunami, it pressed down on Nie Tian. "Lulu!" Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he shouted in a deep voice. Lulu obviously knew what Nie Tian meant, and agreed, instantly activating the power of the Holy Soul Curse. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the sacred soul curse seal in Nie Tian's body went berserk. Streams of energy surged into the sky and reverberated in the air. How is this possible? The Shi family warriors below suddenly felt that Nie Tian's aura was becoming stronger and stronger. They couldn't help but be puzzled and cry out in alarm. Nie Tian's current aura was much stronger than before. No one could understand why. Shi Bailey didn't care about it and continued to slap down with his palm. "Kill!" Just as Nie Tian's aura skyrocketed to the extreme, he let out a low roar, and sword intent burst out from his body. Sword shadows rose against the sky, rolling like dragons. Rumble! Bang bang bang! Then, a violent explosion sounded, and the berserk sword aura surged in the air, hitting the quicksand in the air like a sand boat. Shi Bailey suddenly felt that something was wrong. His eyes couldn't help but tremble, and his figure instantly retreated. But unfortunately, he was still a step too late. Bang! With a muffled sound, under the impact of the berserk sword shadows, Shi Bailey's figure was sent flying into the sky, drawing a bloody trail in the air. Fourth young master! This unbelievable scene caused everyone's expression to freeze, and they cried out in alarm. Who would have thought that lunatic Bailey, who had the strength of a demi-saint at the 5th order, couldn't withstand a single sword attack from Nie Tian, who had the strength of a 3rd order half-saint? How was this possible? How could Nye Tian be so strong? Fourth brother. Upon seeing this, Shi Wui's eyes widened, and he let out a loud shout. Then, he fixed his ice-cold gaze on Nye Tian. He could feel that there was a strange power surging in Nye Tian's body, pushing his martial physique to the limit, and exploding with even more power. Is this a forbidden technique? Shi Wui frowned, and he thought to himself. In his opinion, only a forbidden technique could allow a martial artist's strength to increase by leaps and bounds in an instant. However, any forbidden technique would have a huge backlash, and it would cause great damage to the martial artist's martial physique. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called a forbidden technique. The Holy Soul Curse that Nye Tian used at this moment could also be considered a forbidden technique, and a very powerful one at that. When the Holy Soul Curse was activated to the limit, it was enough to allow Nye Tian to explode with strength several times his current strength. Shi Bailey obviously didn't expect that Nye Tian's strength could increase to such a level in an instant, so he was careless and suffered a great loss. Shi Wui, your opponent is me. When Wei Kong saw that Shi Wui was looking at Nye Tian, he felt insulted. He spoke in a cold voice, and the seven-night demonic dragon slash in his hand released a deep dragon roar. Black light revolved around the black blade like black runes. It was incomparably dark, and the gloomy aura it exuded was like a bottomless abyss. Seven-night demonic dragon, black dragon devours the world. Wei Kong roared, and the saber intent in his body circulated like the night sky. The seven-night demonic dragon slashed out, and a terrifying saber image appeared. Space suddenly sank, and it felt like the entire world was about to split apart. He used all his strength in this slash, and he didn't hold back. Roar! The saber image was as majestic as a mountain, and the instant it fell from the sky, it transformed into a huge dragon head. The dragon roar shook the heavens, and its mouth opened wide as if it wanted to swallow the entire world. High up in the sky, Shi Wui's expression sank, and a scarlet light surged out from his body, causing the Manjusaka outside his body to gradually solidify. Boom! In the next moment, the Manjusaka trembled in the void, and a scarlet light surged out. Two huge petals fell from the sky, and like two giant hands, they clasped together and rushed towards the devil dragon slash. Rumble! Bam bam bam! In the sky, two extremely powerful forces collided, causing the heavens and earth to tremble. Waves of violent energy exploded. Roar! At this time, the devil dragon slash actually let out a mournful cry, and it resounded between heaven and earth. Pfff! Wei Kang's body trembled, and he vomited a mouthful of blood. The two blood-red petals blossomed with a scarlet light, and the devil dragon slash actually couldn't withstand it, and it collapsed. Wei Kong die. Shi Wui's cold voice rang out. He took a step forward, and a scarlet petal appeared, suppressing the space around him as it shot towards Wei Kong. Wei Kong was already injured, and if he was hit by the Manjusaka, he would die without a doubt. 9 limits of the starry sky, heaven slash. At this moment of life and death, a fierce roar rang out, and a sword image whistled out, directly attacking the gigantic petal in the air. Bang! The instant the sword image landed on the petal, a muffled sound rang out, and the sword image crumbled. However, the gigantic petal also tilted slightly to the side. Standing on the ground, Nye Tian called out, Wei Kong. Wei Kang's eyes trembled, and he immediately understood. His silhouette flickered, and he rushed towards Nye Tian. At the same time, a pair of astral wings appeared behind Nye Tian's back. With a flap of his wings, a huge force condensed into a whirlpool in the air, extending towards the entrance of the cave. Wei Kong arrived, and with a single step, he entered the whirlpool together with Nye Tian. Their speed instantly increased, and they flew towards the entrance of the cave. Chapter 29:15. Earth Vein Chi. Boom! The terrifying palm shadow was several thousand meters long, and when it landed, It raised a cloud of dust and shattered the valley. However, after the dust settled, there was not a single person in the huge pit on the ground. Nye Tian and Wei Kong had already entered the cave. Damn it! Shi Wui's eyes narrowed, and he roared like an enraged beast. The Shi family's cultivators looked at Shi Wui with trembling eyes, not daring to make a single sound. Second brother. At this time, Shi Bailey came to Shi Wui's side with an ugly expression on his face. Nye Tian's sword attack had injured him quite a bit, and his eyes were scarlet red, filled with killing intent. Shi Wui's face was so gloomy that it looked like blood was dripping out of it. His eyes were cold and gloomy, and it was obvious that he was furious. The chest height valley that he had personally protected had actually been breached. This was a huge humiliation. Second brother, should we chase after them? Shi Bailey's eyes trembled as he asked viciously. How? Shi Wui roared. This cave leads to the core region of the Scarlet Blood Sacrificial Array. There are countless killing formations along the way. If we chase after them, aren't we just courting death? This. Shi Bailey's face stiffened and he was speechless. Humph. I don't believe that Wei Kong and that brat can get close to the array's eye. Shi Wui roared and a fierce light flashed in his eyes. He didn't dare to chase after them because there were countless killing formations and restrictions in the cave. He didn't believe that Wei Kong and Nye Tian could pass through the layers of killing formations and get close to the array's eye. Wei Kong and that brat will definitely die in the cave. Shi Bailey's eyes turned, and he said in a cold tone, It's a pity that eighth sister will be buried with them. Eighth sister has already betrayed the Shi family by following those two brats. Her death is not to be regretted. Shi Wui sneered and said ruthlessly. Second brother is right. Shi Bailey nodded. He didn't care about Shi Liulan's life or death. At the same time, inside the cave, Nye Tian was running with Wei Kong. After a while, he sensed that no one was chasing after him, so he slowed down. Wei Kong, how are you? Are you all right? Nye Tian put Wei Kong down and asked with a frown. Cough cough, I'm fine. Wei Kong coughed twice and actually coughed out blood. His face was also as pale as paper. It was obvious that he was severely injured. He had already sustained some injuries in his exchange with Shi Wui. Although Shi Wui's final attack didn't hit him directly, the aftershock from the attack had caused his injuries to worsen. Don't move. Nye Tian supported Wei Kong, and the power of the Terra's source surged out of his body, quickly entering Wei Kang's body. After receiving the power of the earth vein source, Wei Kang's complexion improved slightly. He looked at Nye Tian with some surprise and nodded, saying, Thank you. Brother Wei is too polite. I should be the one thanking you. Without you, we wouldn't have been able to enter this place. Nye Tian smiled faintly and took out a few elixirs that could help Wei Kong recover his strength. Wei Kong nodded and swallowed the elixirs. And, in the next moment, Nye Tian seemed to notice something and his expression changed. Brother Nye, what's wrong? Wei Kong took a deep breath, recovering his composure slightly. My body has fused with the earth attributes Terra's source. When I used the Terra's source just now, I felt a strange energy fluctuation. Nye Tian said with a frown. Is there a problem? Wei Kong asked. Right now, all he wanted to do was to find the formation core as soon as possible and complete the task Shirchani had given him. It's nothing, I just found it strange. The corners of Nye Tian's mouth twitched, but he didn't pay it too much attention. Not daring to waste any more time, Wei Kong took out the formation diagram and confirmed the route. Nye Tian, don't look at the formation diagram anymore. Just follow your instincts. At this time, the fat cat's voice sounded in Huang Xiaolong's mind. My instincts? Nye Tian was stunned, not knowing what the fat cat meant. Yes. The fat cat nodded. When you used the Terra's source just now, didn't you feel a strange energy fluctuation? That's Terra's chi. Terra's chi. Nye Tian was stunned again, not understanding what the fat cat was saying. Simply put, It's the aura emitted by the Terra's chi. The fat cat laughed. All you need to know is that this is a type of energy that can resonate with the earth attributes chi. I am very sure that the Scarlet Blood Sacrificial Formation must have borrowed the power of the Terra's chi under the Cloud Buddha mountain range. Otherwise, it would be impossible to build such a huge formation. You only need to sense the Terra's chi to find the best route to the formation core. After listening to the fat cat's words, Nye Tian couldn't help but smile. I understand. The Scarlet Blood Sacrificial Formation was built by borrowing the power of the Terra's chi. The Terra's source in Nye Tian's body could resonate with the Terra's chi. Therefore, he only needed to sense the Terra's chi to find the formation core. Building a formation based on the Terra's chi, the Sure family has some tricks. At this time, the Ghost Emperor's voice rang out, clearly agreeing with the Fat Cat's point of view. Since the Fat Cat and the Ghost Emperor were sure that they could find the formation core by following the Terra's chi, Nye Tian no longer hesitated and put away the formation diagram. In all honesty, the diagram was too complicated. Even if he gave it to the Fat Cat, it would take a long time to completely decipher it. How could it be as simple and convenient as following the Terra's chi to find the formation core? Wei Kong didn't know a thing about formations. Seeing that Nye Tian had put away the diagram, he thought that the latter had found the right route and didn't say anything. Next, Nye Tian led the way and walked in front, relying on the resonance between the Terra's source and Terra's chi to move forward bit by bit. At this time, he realized that the caves in the mountain were connected in all directions and were very complicated. If he wanted to rely on deciphering the formation diagram to move forward, he didn't know how long it would take. However, even though Nye Tian had the resonance with the Terra's chi, he didn't dare to be careless. Every step he took was cautious and cautious. Because of this, their speed was very slow. After spending a whole 2 days, Nye Tian and Wei Kong finally got close to the formation core of the Scarlet Blood Sacrificial Formation. At this time, Nye Tian's whole body was covered in sweat and his face was as white as paper. In these 2 days, he had maintained a high level of concentration, which consumed a lot of his mental energy. In addition, he had used the power of the Holy Soul Seal, so his martial body was damaged and hadn't fully recovered. Therefore, he was about to reach his limit. "Brother Nye, let's stop and rest for a while." Wei Kong saw that Nye Tian's face was not looking good, so he quickly suggested. "Okay." Nye Tian nodded. He needed to rest for a while. "Nye Tian, leave the rest of the journey to that little girl from the Sure clan," Nye Tian said. At this time, the Fat Cat's voice sounded again and said to Nye Tian, "We are very close to the formation core. That Sure family's little girl has the bloodline of Manjusaka, so her perception of Manjusaka is much stronger than yours." "Okay." Nye Tian's eyes lit up and he nodded. Chapter 29:16. The Forbidden Wall. Nye Tian took out the 9 extremes array and called Sure Lulan out. Cher and the rest followed behind her. "Big brother Nye Tian, what is this place?" After the Sea Dragon King came out, he looked at the unfamiliar surroundings and asked excitedly. "Don't ask too many questions. Remember to follow me closely." Nye Tian didn't have time to explain too much. He glanced at Cher, and his heart inexplicably calmed down. When Wei Kong saw Cher and the rest, he was dumbfounded. How could he have imagined that there would be so many people following behind Nye Tian? Nye Tian didn't bother to explain anything, and directly explained the current situation to Sure Lulan. "All right, I understand." Sure Lulan's beautiful eyes flickered as she nodded her head, following which a layer of faint red light surged out from her body. This was Manjusaka's energy. Nye Tian could feel that the energy from Sure Lulan's body was similar to Sure Wui's bloodline energy, just much weaker. After a short rest, the group set off. Sure Lulan walked at the front, relying on her perception of Manjusaka to get closer and closer to the Saint Array's eye. Because they had to avoid the killing array in the space, Nie Tian and the rest moved at a very slow pace. A few hours later, they arrived at a spacious area. In front of them was a narrow cliff, and below them was a bottomless abyss. It seemed to be a sea of fire, and one could faintly see tongues of fire flickering in the air. Everyone looked at their surroundings in astonishment. Who would have thought that there would be such a unique space in the depths of the earth? Nie Tian, all of you must be careful. Don't move recklessly. This lord can feel a powerful killing array in the space. At this time, Fat Cat's voice sounded out, reminding Nie Tian. Nie Tian nodded. He wanted to open the 9 extremes array and let everyone in. It would be safer for him to walk on the cliff alone. However, to his shock, he discovered that there was a strange force in the space around him, preventing him from opening the 9 extremes array. Oh no! Nie Tian's face didn't change much even though he knew something was wrong in his heart. Since they were already here, they couldn't possibly go back. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have allowed Cher and the others to come out. It was too late to say anything now. At this point, he could only tell everyone to be careful. Nie Tian took a deep breath, glanced at everyone, and said in a deep voice, "Listen up, everyone. I'll be at the front. Everyone, follow me closely and follow my route. Don't deviate even the slightest bit." Yes. Everyone nodded. The atmosphere was very tense, and their hearts were in their throats. Nie Tian took a step forward and exhaled deeply. His face was tense, and he couldn't help but feel nervous. Every step that followed was a matter of life and death, and not just for him, but for everyone. Nie Tian, I will provide you with a route. You must not take the wrong one. Fat Cat's voice sounded, and in Nie Tian's divine sense, a light and shadow map appeared, and there was an obvious route on it. Yes. Nie Tian nodded, and according to the route, he took a step forward. When his foot landed, the surrounding space was silent. Nothing had happened. Only then did he feel much more at ease. Nie Tian walked forward step by step, completely following the route provided by Fat Cat, not daring to deviate. The others followed closely behind him, and they were even more cautious. However, on the cliff, halfway through, the route map in Nie Tian's divine sense was cut off. He was stunned and stopped in place, not daring to move. It was obvious that Fat Cat was cracking the killing array in the space, and finding the gap in the killing array. However, after Nie Tian stood quietly in place for a few minutes, Fat Cat still didn't respond at all. Beads of sweat appeared on Nie Tian's forehead, but he didn't dare to disturb Fat Cat, so he didn't say anything. After another few minutes, Fat Cat finally responded, and the route map extended downwards again. Nie Tian took a deep breath, and continued to walk forward. What is that? Just at this moment, an exclamation suddenly sounded, breaking the silence of the space. Nie Tian frowned, and his body stopped moving as he looked behind him. The exclamation just now was made by the Sea Dragon King. Who? Just at this moment, from the abyss below, a ball of red fireball flew in the opposite direction and headed straight for Nie Tian and the others. Be careful! Wei Kong sensed that something was wrong, and he shouted. Nie Tian's eyes focused, and he took a step forward, taking a few meters forward. Cher and the others behind him immediately followed closely. However, the Sea Dragon King, who was second from the last, had no time left. He was in a dilemma, and he panicked. Just at this moment, the fireball arrived, and directly hit the Sea Dragon King's body. Bang! A muffled sound, the Sea Dragon King's body swayed, and he fell off the cliff. This space was very strange, and the surrounding pressure was very strong. Martial artists couldn't fly in the air at all. Ah! The Sea Dragon King screamed, and his body fell instantly. Sea Dragon King! Nie Tian's eyes trembled, and he shouted. Immediately after, he wanted to act, but he realized that the surrounding space was very strong, and his expression changed. At the moment of life and death, Wei Kong, who was the closest to the Sea Dragon King, moved. He actually took a step forward and jumped down. He stretched out his hand and forcefully pulled the Sea Dragon King up. The Sea Dragon King landed steadily on the cliff, but Wei Kang's body fell at an extremely fast speed, falling into the abyss. Senior Martial Brother. Shi Luolan's beautiful eyes trembled, and her originally clear and bright voice became sharp. Wei Kong saved the Sea Dragon King, but he himself fell into the abyss. Hua! At the most critical moment, the sound of metal chains could be heard in the air. Immediately after, a chain appeared and tightly wrapped around Wei Kong and pulled him back. Wei Kong relied on the strength of the chain and his body moved. He took a step on the cliff and stood beside Nie Tian. That was close. Nie Tian kept the bone-eroding soul shackling chains and took a deep breath. Many thanks. Wei Kong nodded his head, and his forehead was already full of sweat. Big brother Nie Tian, the fireballs are coming again. And at this moment, the Sea Dragon King's voice sounded again, and he shouted in fear. Nie Tian's eyes darkened, and he saw that in the abyss below countless fireballs were rushing over, and it was like a rain of fire that filled the sky. Go! Nie Tian growled and instantly increased his speed. At the same time, he activated the Star Soul Shield and enveloped everyone. Bang! 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 Countless fireballs hit the Star Soul Shield, and a series of concentrated muffled sounds could be heard in the air. However, Nie Tian didn't care at all. He followed the path drawn by the fat cat and rushed forward at top speed. In just tens of seconds, he had covered a distance of a few thousand meters and finally walked past the cliff. Everyone landed on a spacious land, and when they turned back to look at the cliff behind them, they couldn't help but gasp. The entire cliff was already covered by the fireballs and became a sea of fire. If they had been one step slower, they would have been buried in the sea of fire. After a while, everyone regained their composure, and only then did they realize that they seemed to have arrived at a huge cave. There! And at this moment, Shi Luolan seemed to have discovered something, and she pointed to the depths of the cave and shouted in surprise. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and he looked over. In the depths of the cave, there was actually a scarlet halo that was slowly spreading out. Let's go and take a look. He calmed down and said, and then carefully walked over. After entering the depths of the cave, Nie Tian finally saw clearly that the thing that was releasing the scarlet halo was actually a huge scarlet wall. The scarlet wall was very strange, and it was actually formed by a scarlet-red liquid. It flowed slowly and released rays of light that dyed the entire space red. Chapter 29:17. Looking back, Wall of Restriction. Hearing Fat Cat's words, Nie Tian's expression changed. His eyes were filled with passion. Shirchani said before that the Eye of the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array was a powerful restriction formed by Manjasaka's power. Didn't that mean that as long as they passed through the wall of restriction, they would be able to get close to the Eye of the Sacred Array? It really is Manjasaka's power. Shi Luolan looked at the wall of liquid in front of her. Her beautiful eyes shone brightly as she exclaimed. Manjasaka's aura was very strange. Normal people would not be able to sense the existence of this power. They would only be able to see a dazzling red. However, the people of the Shi family had Manjasaka's power in their blood. Therefore, they could sense Manjasaka's power. At this moment, the wall of restriction was moving slowly. The cave was filled with a dazzling red glow. This wall is so beautiful. Are we going to pass through the wall? Sea Dragon King was stunned by the scene in front of him. He took a step forward and actually wanted to touch the wall of restriction. Don't move. Nie Tian was shocked by Sea Dragon King's action. He shouted and stretched out his hand to grab Sea Dragon King. Swoosh! Right at this moment, the ceiling wall trembled. A red light shot out like a sharp blade, sharp to the extreme. Pooh! In the next moment, the red glow flew past Sea Dragon King's chest. The sharp aura left a thin line of blood on his chest. The wound was not big. However, fresh blood gushed out and instantly dyed half of Sea Dragon King's body red. Sea Dragon King, are you okay? Nye Tion's eyes darkened. He sensed Sea Dragon King's body. There was no abnormal aura in the latter's body. It seemed that his martial body was only injured. Nye Tion was relieved. Sea Dragon King endured the intense pain. After a long time, the wound on his chest stopped bleeding. He was still in shock, and only calmed down after a long time. He looked at Nye Tion and said, "Brother Nye Tion, this red wall is very powerful. That red beam almost killed me." This is the core area of the Grand Formation. The power of the restrictive formation is very strong, and there are dangers everywhere. Don't move recklessly. Nye Tion nodded slightly and said in a deep voice. The Sea Dragon King's face was a little ugly. He nodded his head and did not speak anymore. Nye Tion furrowed his brows, his expression extremely ugly. The red light just now made him feel a lingering fear. Although the aura of that red light was not strong, it was extremely sharp, as if it could cut through everything. Fortunately, he managed to pull the Sea Dragon King back in time. Otherwise, the latter would have been killed by the red light. It seemed that the restrictive wall in front of him was more terrifying than Nye Tion had expected. Anyone who got close to the restrictive wall would trigger the danger. Nye Tion, this restrictive wall should be condensed from the liquid of Manjasaka. The power contained within it is unimaginable. Sir Lulan carefully came to Nye Tion's side and said softly, "Yes." Nye Tion nodded his head slightly. He had also guessed what Sir Lulan was talking about. It was hard to imagine how much Manjasaka was used to condense such a restrictive wall. Nye Tion, things are going to be difficult now. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice was heard. She said in a deep voice, "God knows how many killing formations are hidden within this restrictive wall. However, it is difficult for ordinary people to sense Manjasaka. Even the deity cannot sense any aura." Nye Tion heard Fat Cat's words and frowned. His expression turned even uglier. Manjasaka's aura was too strange. Other than the Sher clan, no one else could sense that kind of aura. The killing formations were hidden within the restrictive wall, which was equivalent to isolating the aura. Fat Cat could not even sense the aura of the killing formations, let alone break them. In front of Nye Tion and the others was the core area of a sacred formation. It was not hard to imagine how powerful the killing formations were. That ray of red light just now almost took the life of the Sea Dragon King. "Brother Nye, do you have any ideas?" Wei Kong asked Nye Tion with an equally ugly expression. He knew nothing about formations, so he could only look to Nye Tion. He had already prepared for the worst. If it really did not work, he would have to force his way through. However, he clearly did not know how powerful the sacred formation in front of him was. Not to mention that he was only a stage 6 demi-saint. Even if he was a stage 9 demi-saint, he would not be able to break through the restrictive wall with his strength alone. "Nye Tion, this path is a dead end. It will not work." The Ghost Emperor's voice was heard. He had sensed the restrictive wall in front of him countless times, but he still could not think of a way to break it. The Ghost Emperor was a true sacred formation master. If he could not do anything about the restrictive wall in front of him, it meant that this path was really a dead end. "We've gone through so much to get here. Are we just going to give up like this?" Nye Tion frowned and his face was extremely gloomy. It had been very difficult for him to get here. He was really unwilling to give up now. The atmosphere suddenly became heavy, and the air was very stifling. "Nye Tion, let me try." Just when everyone was at their wits' end, a gentle voice was heard. "Cher." Nye Tion spun around and looked at Schwerer, who was standing beside him. His eyes went wide as he asked, "What are you doing?" "Let me try. Maybe I can break this restrictive wall." Cher smiled faintly. Her eyes were extremely clear and pure like a young girl. Nye Tion's face darkened, and he subconsciously pulled Schwerer back. Schwer, this restrictive wall is too terrifying. It's definitely not a joke. He was well aware of how terrifying the restrictive wall was. Even the Ghost Emperor and the little fat cat couldn't do anything to the barrier, so how could Schwer possibly break it? Nie Tian felt that Cher must not have realized how scary the restrictive wall was. She wanted to share his burden, so she stood out. If someone had to step forward to test the restrictive barrier, it would have to be either Nie Tian or Wei Kong. There was no way they would let Snow take such a risk. Nie Tian, I know how terrifying the restrictive barrier is. Please believe me. Schwer looked at Nie Tian's nervous face, but she chuckled. At this time, a thin line appeared between her eyebrows. Heavenly Tao Soul Lattice. Nie Tian suddenly saw the thin line between Cher's eyebrows. His eyes trembled and the corner of his mouth twitched. He knew that the thin line between Cher's eyebrows was her Heavenly Tao Soul Lattice, the 3 lives examining eyes. According to Fat Cat, the 3 lives examining eyes was one of the 5 strongest Heavenly Tao Soul Lattices. Nie Tian clearly remembered that the first time the 3 lives examining eyes appeared was when the Emperor of the Underworld transferred the heaven-punishing devil seal to Cher and she fell into a coma. At that time, Nie Tian wanted to use the Heavenly Tao Sacred Heart to save Cher. However, the appearance of the 3 lives examining eyes caused Cher to wake up on her own. It was obvious that the 3 lives examining eyes allowed Cher to resist the heaven-punishing devil seal in her body. From this, one could see how powerful the 3 lives examining eyes was. However, the 3 lives examining eyes disappeared, as if it had never appeared in the first place. At this time, the 3 lives examining eyes appeared between Cher's eyebrows again. Chapter 29:18. A sudden surprise, the reappearance of Cher's 3 lives examining gaze Heavenly Tao Soul Lattice shocked Nie Tian. This was something he had never expected. Trust me, Nie Tian, Schwer said with a plain tone, her beautiful eyes glittering with purity and determination as she looked into Nie Tian's eyes. Her voice was gentle, but it contained a strong sense of confidence. Nie Tian's gaze trembled slightly, and a warm feeling welled up in his heart. The words, "trust me," was something he often said to others. He didn't expect that Cher would say it to him this time. Nie Tian, let Snow give it a try. At this moment, Little Fat Cat's voice rang out with a hint of excitement. The Heavenly Tao Soul Lattice, 3 lives examining gaze, was something that even he didn't understand. Now that Cher's 3 lives examining gaze had reappeared, something must have happened. The gazes of the others also landed on Nie Tian, as though they were waiting for him to nod. Nie Tian hesitated for a long time before finally nodding his head. It wasn't that he didn't trust Cher, but the matter in front of him was too risky. Cher wanted to try the core-killing formation of a holy array. If there was even the slightest bit of carelessness, they would be consigned to eternal damnation. Trust me. Cher nodded her head. Her beautiful eyes flickered, and a faint smile hung on her lips. The 3 lives examining gaze between her brows became even more obvious. When the others noticed Cher's 3 lives examining gaze, they were very surprised, but they didn't say anything. Of course, they didn't know that this was the 3 lives examining gaze. They only subconsciously thought that it might be Cher's other eye. Cher had a faint smile on her face as she walked step by step towards the wall of restrictions. Her expression was extremely calm, as though the thing in front of her wasn't something dangerous, but an ordinary wall. Nie Tian looked at Cher. He was so nervous that he was screaming. His nerves were stretched taut, and he could hear his heartbeat clearly. If it was him, he definitely wouldn't be so nervous. Cher approached the restrictive barrier bit by bit. 10 meters, 5 meters, 3 meters. Everything was silent, so silent that it was suffocating. However, nothing happened. Nie Tian's eyes trembled. He felt very strange. Previously, the Sea Dragon King activated the killing restriction formation when he was 10 meters away from the restriction wall. But now, Cher was only 3 meters away from the restriction wall, and nothing happened. It was as though the restrictive barrier did not sense Cher's presence at all. This was too strange. At this time, Cher walked to the edge of the restrictive spell wall, almost touching the cliff. Nie Tion's heart jumped to his throat, and even his breathing stopped. At this time, Cher gazed at the wall of restrictions. She slowly activated her 3 lives reviewing eyes, and a halo of light surged within it, forming a light vortex. The next moment, the strangest thing happened. Rays of light gushed out from the 3 lives reversing eyes and slowly fell on the walls of the restrictive spell like rain. Hua! The liquid state of the restrictive spell wall was impacted by an external force, and it shook violently. Everyone's eyes shrunk at this moment, and their faces turned green. However, the restrictive spell wall only shook a little, and nothing happened after that. Following which, the 3 lives reversing eyes released an even more intense halo, and it actually formed a deep vortex on the restrictive spell wall, just like the collapse of the water surface. Following which, the vortex on the restrictive spell wall became bigger and deeper. The power of the halo released by the 3 lives reversing eyes slowly seeped in, and it was actually going to penetrate through the restrictive spell wall. Nie Tion and the rest looked at it in a daze. They did not even blink their eyes, as though they were afraid of missing something. Following which, everything went smoothly. The vortex on the restrictive spell wall continued to expand, and finally, it penetrated through, and a circular passage appeared. Everyone was stunned by the scene in front of them, and they all gasped. Even the fat cat and the ghost emperor were dumbfounded. They did not know how Cher did this. Following which, the circular passage gradually expanded, and soon it was a few meters long. Nie Tion. Cher's voice sounded at this time, and she shouted, "Yes." Nie Tion reacted, and he responded. Then, he looked at the others and said, "Go in. I'll go first." Wei Kong stepped forward and said in a deep voice. He was worried that there would be some danger, so he was the first to try. Nie Tion nodded, and he asked the others to step back for the time being. Wei Kong walked over step by step, following the path that Cher had taken, and did not dare to deviate from it. Soon, he arrived at the edge of the restrictive spell wall. He glanced at Cher, and then stepped into the circular passage. The moment he entered, the restrictive spell wall shook a little. But just like before, nothing else happened. Wei Kang's figure was very fast. He stepped out of the passage in a few steps, and walked to the other side of the restrictive spell wall. When Nie Tion saw that Wei Kong had passed through the restrictive spell wall, he let out a long breath of turbid air, and his heart that was hanging in his throat relaxed. Then, the others began to enter. Everything went smoothly. Soon, except for Nie Tion and Cher, the others reached the other side of the restrictive spell wall. Nie Tion took a deep breath, walked over and came to Cher's side. He turned around and looked at Cher. "I'm fine." Cher's forehead was full of sweat, and her face was a little pale, but she smiled at Nie Tion and said faintly, "Yes." Nie Tion didn't say anything. He only nodded. Not daring to waste any more time, he blurred into action and shot through the restrictive spell wall like a fish. At this time, only Cher was left. Cher smiled faintly, and her figure moved, and she directly stepped into the passage. Hua! However, at this moment, the restrictive spell wall shook again. Nie Tion's eyes trembled, and he was extremely nervous. But this time, it was not like before. Boom! The restrictive barrier began to shake violently. The circular passageway was instantly submerged, and Shui-Er was completely sealed within the restrictive barrier. The sudden scene made Nie Tion's eyes tremble violently, and he roared like a wild beast, "Cher!" The scene in front of him was something that he had never expected. But Cher was sealed in the restrictive spell wall, and she could not move at all. It was as if she was frozen, and in a sea of red, only her silhouette could be vaguely seen. "Damn it!" Nie Tion roared. Suddenly, sword essence surged out from his body, and Starlight Heaven Slash appeared in his hand. He pointed the sword at the restrictive spell wall and slashed wildly. Nia Tian. The others were startled, and they shouted. But the moment the sword's shadow hit the restrictive spell wall, it was like a clay ox in the sea, and it was swallowed up by the wall. Ah! Nia Tian screamed, and he wanted to attack again, but Fat Cat's voice rang in his mind. Calm down, Cher is fine. Fat Cat shouted anxiously. Fine. Nia Tian was stunned, and his face stiffened. I have a feeling that the little girl is fine, Fat Cat said again, and his eyes were shining, as if he was expecting something. Hua! At this time, the crowd saw that the restrictive spell wall started to shake violently, as if it was being pulled by a force, and it was sinking rapidly. Chapter 29:19. Light Sphere Formation I. Sure Lulan could feel the wall of restrictions weakening at a rapid pace. Her face was filled with shock. It was as if something was absorbing the power of the wall of restrictions. When Ye Tian heard Sure Lulan's words, his eyes widened and his expression changed. He thought of a possibility. Cher was absorbing the power of the wall of restrictions. Cher was sealed in the wall of restrictions, and the power of the wall of restrictions couldn't disappear for no reason. If it wasn't Cher absorbing the power, who else could it be? Before Nye Tian and the others could react, the wall of restrictions disappeared right in front of their eyes. Disappeared. To be more precise, Cher had absorbed all the power. The instant the wall of restrictions disappeared, Nye Tian saw the last bit of red light disappear into Cher's 3 lives reversing gaze. Cher's 3 lives reversing gaze also closed in an instant, as if it had never existed. However, at this moment, Shui Er's body was surging with a scarlet-red halo that wrapped around her in layers, like a scarlet-red vortex. Nye Tian could feel the power in Cher's body increasing at a crazy rate. His face stiffened and he was so shocked that he couldn't utter a word. It was unknown how many red spider lilies were used to condense this restrictive wall. The power contained within it was unimaginably terrifying. After absorbing such a terrifying amount of power, Cher's strength would definitely skyrocket. What shocked Nye Tian even more was Cher's 3 lives reversing gaze Heavenly Tao Soul Head. How could it be so powerful that it could absorb the entire wall of restrictions in the blink of an eye? At this moment, Cher's eyes were closed and she seemed to be in a state of cultivation. Since she had absorbed so much power in one go, it was only natural that she needed some time to assimilate it. Nye Tian, quickly bring the Heavenly Tao Sacred Heart over. At this moment, the Fat Cat's voice suddenly sounded. It chuckled and said with a burning gaze, Fat, what are you doing? Nye Tian's gaze suddenly froze as he asked. That last snow is currently fusing with the power of the red spider lily that she just absorbed. If she fuses with the Heavenly Tao Sacred Heart now, the 2 types of energy mutually promote each other, which is more conducive to fusion. The Fat Cat smiled proudly and said, and in this way she can absorb even more power, which will increase her strength even more. Nye Tian's eyes flashed with passion. He immediately understood what Fat Cat meant. Put it into the 9 superbs and leave the rest to me, the Fat Cat said with an excited smile. Nye Tian nodded and placed Cher into the 9 extremities. Then, he let the Sea Dragon King and Xiao Ye enter the 9 extremities as well. Nye Tian, in 3 days you will see a shockingly powerful Cher. The Fat Cat's voice sounded. Then, a strand of colored glaze chi appeared and instantly disappeared into the 9 extremities. Nye Tian's lips curled into a smile. He was looking forward to it. Cher absorbed the power of the restrictive spell wall and fused with the Heavenly Tao Sacred Heart. Her strength would definitely increase exponentially. It was just that he didn't know what realm her strength would reach in 3 days. It must be said that Cher really benefited from a disaster this time. Nye Tian, we don't have much time left. Wei Kong looked at Nye Tian and said in a deep voice. Let's start looking for the array eye. Nye Tian nodded and began to look around. He realized that they were in a huge abyss surrounded by empty stone walls. There was nothing strange about it. Logically speaking, They should be able to see the array eye after breaking through the restrictive spell wall. Nia Tian, it's up there. The Ghost Emperor's voice sounded in a deep voice. Nia Tian raised his head and looked at the sky. He saw a huge ball of light floating in midair. It was more than 100 meters long, and from afar, it looked like a blazing sun, emitting blinding rays of light. Above the ball of light, numerous tentacles formed from runes extended into the sky, reaching all the way out of the abyss. The Holy Array Eye. Nia Tian's eyes darkened as he looked at the huge ball of light. He could feel that the huge ball of light was the Scarlet Blood Sacrificial Array Eye. Let me destroy it. Wei Kang's eyes widened and he roared. Then, his figure moved, flying straight towards the ball of light. Wei Kang! Senior brother! Nia Tian and Shi Lulan were stunned for a moment, and then they cried out in alarm. That was the Holy Array Eye, and Wei Kang was too impulsive to rush over. Boom! Wei Kang hovered in midair, the saber intent around him surged, and the shadow of the 7 Knights' demonic dragon appeared, enveloping his body. In his hand, the 7 Knights' demonic dragon slash shone brightly. Rays of black saber light surged, and as if the night had descended, the surrounding space turned dark. Boom! In the next instant, the 7 Knights' demonic dragon slashed out, and a terrifying saber shadow appeared, howling like a dragon as it slashed towards the Array Eye. Bang! However, just as the saber shadow was about to land, it was blocked by an invisible barrier in the void. With a muffled bang, the saber shadow shattered. Wei Kang was rebounded by a huge force, and his figure swayed as he flew backwards, smashing heavily into the stone wall beside him. Nia Tian's eyes narrowed, and he immediately flew over. He stretched out his hand, and a powerful suction force surged out, pulling Wei Kang out from the stone wall. I'm fine. Wei Kang stopped in midair. Although he was covered in blood, he spoke in a cold tone. Nia Tian sensed that Wei Kang's breathing was stable, and he was fine. He said, There's a protective barrier around the Array Eye. It won't be easy to destroy it. Then what should we do? Wei Kang took a deep breath and calmed down a lot. He looked at the Array Eye with a gloomy gaze and said, Don't be anxious. Nia Tian nodded slightly and asked the Ghost Emperor, Ghost Emperor, is there a way to break the protective barrier of the Array Eye? Nia Tian, this protective barrier is connected to the entire Great Array, and it can absorb power from the surrounding earth veins. The Ghost Emperor said in a low voice, Unless it's a true sage, it's impossible to break the protective barrier. When Nia Tian heard the Ghost Emperor's words, his eyes suddenly darkened, and his expression turned ugly. They had risked their lives and finally found the Array Eye, but they couldn't break the protective barrier. How could he accept this? Ghost Emperor, is there no other way? Nia Tian asked again with a gloomy expression. The patterns of this great array are very complicated. Even this emperor would need several months to find the weak point of the protective barrier, the Ghost Emperor replied helplessly. Nia Tian's expression turned even uglier, and he froze in place for a moment. Look, there's someone up there. At this time, Shi Lulan seemed to have discovered something, and she suddenly pointed upwards. Nia Tian and Wei Kang were both startled, and they looked up at the sky, seeing a dense crowd of people. Above the abyss, the Shi family cultivators were holding more than 100 sea lords, and they all wore excited smiles on their faces. Chapter 29:20. Frenzied. In the sky above the abyss, a figure stood on a high platform in the middle of a large square. It was none other than the Shi family's patriarch, Shi Donglai. Beside Shi Donglai stood more than a dozen white-haired old men. Their eyes were burning with excitement, and their eyes were trembling. These white-haired old men were the elders of the Cloud Buddha Shi family. Today was a very important day for the Cloud Buddha Shi family. The scarlet blood sacrificial array that they had prepared for millions of years was finally going to open. They had waited for millions of years for this moment. How could the Shi family not be excited? Lord Patriarch, let's begin. At this time, an elder stood up, unable to conceal the excitement in his eyes as he cautiously said to Shi Donglai. Very well. Shi Donglai nodded slightly, his face gloomy, his eyes as deep as the sea, indecipherable. The sacrificial ceremony begins. The elder shouted, announcing the start of the scarlet blood sacrificial ceremony. Everyone from the Shi family shifted their gazes to the sky above the abyss. Yes. The Shi family cultivators above the abyss answered in unison. Kill! Immediately, these cultivators roared fiercely, their eyes filled with ruthlessness as they raised their palms, slapping at the Sea Lords. Bang! Bang! In an instant, muffled sounds resounded, blood splattered high up in the sky, dripping with the stench of blood. Blood splattered in the air, falling to the ground and being absorbed by an invisible force in the void, turning into blood-colored runes that flowed into the scarlet blood path. At the same time, in the sky above the Cloud Buddha mountain range, the red damask made of Manjusaka seemed to be stimulated by some kind of power and began to react, slowly opening, releasing a blinding red light. However, this reaction only lasted for a moment before it slowly disappeared. On the high platform in the square, an elder walked to Shi Donglai's side, reporting in a low voice, "Lord Patriarch, there is not enough blood, the Manjusaka is not open, the array cannot be activated." Shi Donglai had already expected this result, so he was not surprised at all. He only nodded, the corners of his mouth twitching as he spat out two words, "Do it." Yes. The elder nodded, a chilling light flashed in his eyes. On the square, the people of Shi family were staring at the sky above the abyss with a fervent expression, as if they were waiting for something. However, at this time, hundreds of black-clothed martial artists appeared high in the sky. Pairs of cold eyes stared at them like wolves staring at little sheep. Everyone felt the chilling killing intent, and their faces couldn't help but change as they discussed in alarm. Who are they? Why do all of you look so murderous? What are they doing? Are they trying to kill us? Impossible. Lord Patriarch and all the elders are over there. How would they dare to attack their own people? However, just as the crowd was in chaos, the hundreds of silhouettes made their move. Violent chi was released and linked together, pressing down on the crowd in the public square. What are you doing? Are you crazy? We are of the same race. Do you want to kill us? Lord Clan Chief, Lord Elder, save me! The crowd instantly fell into chaos and began to cry for help. However, their Lord Clan Chief and Lord Elder were standing on the high platform, coldly watching from the sidelines. There was even a hint of excitement in their eyes. Lord Clan Chief, isn't it too cruel for us to sacrifice our own people? An elder walked to Shi Donglai's side and asked with an ugly expression. Is it cruel? Shi Donglai sneered as his cold gaze swept over the elder, causing the latter to involuntarily retreat and lower his head, not daring to utter another word. How can this be called cruel? They are all members of the Shi family. It is their honor to be able to contribute to the Shi family's cause. Our Cloud Buddha Shi family will soon become a family in the sacred reincarnation realm. Their sacrifice is very meaningful. Another old man spoke vehemently and loudly. That's right, that's right. The other elders immediately echoed, their eyes flickering with a perverted passion. In order to enter the so-called sacred reincarnation realm, they didn't hesitate to kill their own people, yet they still wanted to claim it as their honor. These people were simply deranged. Shi Donglai's face was as calm as still water, without the slightest reaction. Right now, he only wanted to activate the scarlet blood sacrificial array as soon as possible. He didn't care how many Shi family members were sacrificed. Even if every member of the Shi family had to be sacrificed today, he wouldn't hesitate. All he wanted was to be able to enter the sacred reincarnation realm. Ah! Miserable screams resounded in the square as countless Shi family members were killed and thrown into the abyss to become sacrifices for the array. At the same time, in the abyss, Shi Lulan could see everything that was happening in the sky clearly. Her eyes were lifeless and her entire body was like a withered tree. She had never killed a single person in her life, so it was easy to imagine how shocking the scene in front of her was. She never dared to believe that such a great sin existed in the world. Just how cruel did a person have to be able to kill their own race without any qualms? The image of Shi Donglai as a father in her heart suddenly collapsed. A bunch of lunatics. Wei Kong clenched his fists tightly and gritted his teeth. His handsome face was filled with a trace of malevolence. Nie Tian's face was also gloomy. Even though he had seen many tragic scenes in his life, the scene in front of him was still a great shock to him. Nie Tian. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's excited voice suddenly rang out. Ghost Emperor, what did you discover? Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he asked nervously. It was obvious that the Ghost Emperor had discovered something, which was why he was so excited. Take a closer look and see if the blood of the sacrificial offerings has been absorbed by the formation core. The Ghost Emperor's eyes trembled as he said excitedly. Nie Tian's expression gradually changed as he looked at the formation core. Although the blood seemed to have been absorbed by the runes within the array, the formation core seemed to emit a strange red light. But every time the blood was absorbed, the light sphere would release a strange red light. This undoubtedly meant that the blood was ultimately absorbed by the formation core before being transferred to Manjusaka. Nie Tian, I can feel that when the formation core absorbs the blood, the protective barrier will weaken. Perhaps this is your chance. The Ghost Emperor's eyes were burning as he said in a deep voice. I understand. Nie Tian nodded. He then looked at Wei Kong and explained the situation to him. Good, let's seize this opportunity and attack together to break the formation core's protective barrier. Wei Kong nodded and said, Nie Tian nodded and began to secretly accumulate sword intent. At this time, many of the Shi family's members were thrown into the abyss. Their bodies were instantly torn apart by the formation runes and turned into a bloody light. Attack! When Nie Tian saw the glowing sphere flashing with a strange red light again, his eyes darkened and he let out a low roar. Good! Wei Kong roared as he shot into the sky. Chapter 29-21. Killing fellow clansmen in the abyss, Nie Tian and Wei Kang's figures moved at the same time. Boom! Boom! The aura around the two was wild, the saber intent and sword intent surged in the air, majestic and sharp. 7 Knights Demonic Dragon, Black Dragon devours the world. Wei Kong roared, and the 7 Knights Demonic Dragon struck out. The dragon-shaped saber shadow of over 10,000 meters surged out, pressing down on the void. It was as though the entire abyss was shaking. 9 Limits of Starry Sky, Heavenly Slash. At the same time, Nie Tian also made his move. The heavenly slash of starry sky slashed through the air, and the terrifying sword shadow was like a waterfall of flowing light, rushing towards the glowing sphere. In the sky above the abyss, dozens of black-robed martial artists were stunned when they saw the scene below. How could they have imagined that there would be people in the abyss? Boom! Boom! At this moment, the saber shadow and the sword shadow fell at almost the same time, heavily bombarding the invisible protective barrier, and a muffled sound like thunder. Crack, 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 crack. In the next moment, the saber shadow and the sword shadow paused in the air at the same time, and then directly cracked and shattered. Boom! Boom! At the same time, Nie Tian and Wei Kong were hit by a strong rebound force, and their figures flew out at the same time, smashing into the stone walls on both sides. Senior brother, Nie Tian. The scene in the air caused Shi Liulan's eyes to tremble, and she cried out in shock. A moment later, Nie Tian and Wei Kang's figures walked out from the stone wall, their bodies drenched in blood, looking very frightening. Senior brother, Nie Tian, are you two all right? Shi Liulan came to Nie Tian and Wei Kang's side and asked in shock. I'm fine. Nie Tian took a deep breath, and his body shook and the blood on his body scattered. His eyes were still sharp, but his face was a little pale. Wei Kong was different. He was already injured, and was rebounded once before. This time, he was rebounded again, and his injuries were extremely serious. Nie Tian walked over and used the power of the Earthstring Source to stabilize Wei Kang's aura. Brother Nie, I'm sorry. I was too weak. Wei Kang's breathing gradually stabilized. He took a deep breath and looked at Nie Tian guiltily. It's because we're too weak. Nie Tian had a helpless look on his face as he stared at the ball of light in the eye of the formation. The protective barrier was too strong. Even though it was weakened by the blood, the combined attack of Nie Tian and Wei Kong was still unable to break it. At this time, above the abyss, on the high platform of the square. What? When Shi Donglai heard the black-clad cultivator's words, his pupils constricted and he growled. How could he have imagined that someone would actually barge into the core region of the holy formation? Lord Patriarch, it's absolutely true. The black-clothed martial artist nodded heavily and said, this subordinate saw it very clearly. In addition to a silver-haired martial artist, there was also the great elder's disciple, Wei Kong, and the 8th young lady. Lulan was also there. Shi Donglai's eyes trembled, and his expression was extremely ugly. Following this, his figure flashed and he appeared above the abyss. His eyes were like sharp blades as they locked onto Nie Tian and the others. His murderous intent was heavy. Father! Below, Shi Lulan also saw Shi Donglai. Her beautiful eyes trembled, and just as she called out the first word, she couldn't say the next one no matter how hard she tried. At this time, Shi Donglai was no longer a father in her eyes. Instead, he was a demon who slaughtered his own clansmen. She couldn't understand. Was entering the samsara sacred world really so important that he would slaughter his own clansmen? Of course, she didn't understand. In Shi Donglai's opinion, there was no one or anything in this world more important than opening the scarlet blood path. Lord Patriarch, what should we do? An elder beside Shi Donglai asked in a low voice. The eye of the formation is protected by a protective barrier. Only a sage powerhouse can break it. If they can't destroy the eye of the formation, it will be useless even if they are at the bottom of the abyss, Shi Donglai said coldly after a moment of silence. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. However, because of the protective barrier, no one else could enter the bottom of the abyss, so they couldn't stop Nie Tian and the others. Continue. Shi Donglai looked cold at Nie Tian and the others. After saying this, his figure flashed and he returned to the high platform. He firmly believed that Nie Tian and the others couldn't threaten the eye of the formation, so he could completely ignore them. The massacre continued on the plaza. Mournful screams filled the air. How could the members of the Shi family have imagined that they, as members of the family, would be mercilessly massacred at the most important moment of their family? Mommy! A 7- or 8-year-old child screamed from the crowd as he ran around in panic. However, no one cared about him at this time. Die! At that moment, a black-robed cultivator roared and stretched out his hand. A sharp claw appeared in the air and grabbed at the child. These people were as fanatical as madmen, not even sparing a 7- or 8-year-old child. Stop! Just as the child was about to die, a deep roar sounded and a wild force howled out, blocking the sharp claw in the air. Immediately, a figure landed in front of the child. His slightly stooped body was as imposing as a mountain. Great Elder! The black-robed cultivator in the sky couldn't help but cry out when he saw the figure that suddenly appeared. How could he have imagined that the Shi family's great elder, Shi Chani, would appear at this time? Scram! Shi Chani's aged face was filled with rage. He roared and thrust out his palm, sending the black-robed cultivator flying. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. The other black-robed cultivators were shocked by this sudden scene and immediately turned their gazes to Shi Chani. Beast! You dare to kill your own clansman? Are you even human? Sher Chani roared, blue veins popping out on his face. He was obviously enraged to the extreme. Great Elder! The surviving members of the Sher family looked at Sher Chani and shouted in unison. At this time, Sher Chani was the only one who could protect them. Don't worry, as long as I, Sher Chani, have one last breath left, I won't let you be slaughtered by others. Sher Chani roared. His aura surged like a mountain, towering between the heavens and the earth. The hundreds of black-robed cultivators looked at Sher Chani with trembling eyes, unable to conceal the fear in their hearts. They naturally knew how terrifying Sher Chani was, so they didn't dare to attack again. As the Cloud Buddha Sher family's great elder, Sher Chani's strength was second only to Sher Donglai. Great Elder! At this time, a low voice sounded and a figure landed in front of Sher Chani. It was Sher Donglai. Sher Donglai, are you crazy? Sher Chani roared when he saw Sher Donglai arrive. You are really ruthless. In order to open the Scarlet Blood Road, you actually killed your own clansmen. The Scarlet Blood Road is the pursuit of my Cloud Buddha Sher family for millions of years. It is an honor for the people of the Sher family to sacrifice themselves for the Scarlet Blood Road. Sher Donglai said in a deep voice, not the slightest change in his expression. Chapter 29-22. Great Wish Bodhi Sher Chani was enraged. His eyes were like sharp blades as he stared at Sher Donglai, as if he wanted to tear apart the latter's hypocrisy. Sher Donglai was the patriarch of the Sher family, yet he had to find a dignified reason to kill his own family. Slaughtering his own family and claiming it was glory. What bullshit glory! If it really was glory, then Sher Donglai, the patriarch, should be the first to die. Sher Donglai looked at Sher Chani and was unexpectedly calm. There was no change in his expression, as if Sher Chani's roar was directed at someone else and had nothing to do with him. Grand Elder, I don't mind if you disagree with my actions. Immediately, Sher Donglai opened his mouth and said lightly, but you should not block my path. This is the path of glory that the Cloud Buddha Sher family has prepared for millions of years. You, the Grand Elder of the Sher family, are so short-sighted that you cannot see the glory of the future. This is the tragedy of the Sher family. I, Sher Donglai, as the patriarch, order you to step aside. As he finished speaking, Sher Donglai stepped forward. His aura erupted and the surrounding space suddenly sank. Under the great pressure, space began to groan as if it was about to be torn apart. At this moment, they were inside the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array. Under the effect of the array, the stability of space and time had decreased. Therefore, with Sher Donglai's strength, he could indeed tear apart space and time. Future? Glory? Sher Chani's eyes trembled. He sneered and roared, what a good patriarch of the Sher family! What a good Sher Donglai! What a good sanctimonious person! Sher Donglai's eyes darkened and he took another step forward. His aura was like the sea, about to erupt in the next moment. He roared, Sher Chani, are you going to retreat or not? You want me to retreat? In your dreams. Sher Chani roared and coldly said, if I retreat even half a step today, how can I face the ancestors of the Sher family? As his voice fell, Sher Chani's aura surged out. Crimson halos surged in the air, dyeing the surrounding area red. You overestimate yourself. When Sher Donglai saw that Sher Chani wanted to fight with him, his face suddenly turned cold. He roared and slammed his palm out. Suddenly, a giant crimson palm shadow appeared, causing the void to tremble as it bombarded towards Sher Chani. Lord Patriarch has made his move. When the crowd saw this, their eyes trembled violently and they cried out in shock. Their faces stiffened. Everyone knew that Sher Donglai was the only false saint expert in the entire Sea of Misery. Even though he was only a rank 1 pseudo-sage, his strength was already at the pinnacle of the Sea of Bitterness. After all, under the suppression of the embittered sea, there were very few martial artists who could reach the threshold of demi-saint, much less pseudo-saint. The fact that Shi Donglai was able to attain the strength of a rank 1 pseudo-sage meant that he was the first person to do so in the shore of the Bitter Sea in millions of years. All the Shi family members present knew that Shi Donglai was powerful, but only a handful of them had actually seen him in action. At this moment, Shi Donglai's opponent was the Shi family's Grand Elder, second only to him. Would this battle be a crushing defeat? Humph! In the face of Shi Donglai's all-out attack, Shi Chani sneered, and the aura around his body suddenly skyrocketed. Shi Donglai sensed that Shi Chani's aura had suddenly become violent and immediately sensed that something was wrong. He could not help but narrow his eyes and wanted to stop, but it was too late. Boom! In the blink of an eye, Shi Donglai slammed out with his palm, and the shadow of a Buddha bead appeared in the air. It instantly expanded to thousands of times its original size and shot out at extreme speed. Boom! Immediately, there was a muffled sound in the air. The giant palm shadow actually collapsed under the bombardment of the Buddha bead shadow. Boom! In the next moment, there was another muffled sound, and Shi Donglai's figure was directly sent flying, drawing a bloody arc in the air. Lord Patriarch! The group of black-clothed martial artists were stunned by the scene in front of them, and then they cried out in horror. Who would have thought that Shi Donglai, the strongest expert of the Sea of Bitterness, could not even block Shi Chani's palm? What was going on? The Shi clan members behind Shi Chani stared at him in a daze, their expressions just as shocked. Could it be that Shi Chani was also a pseudo-sage? However, some people could see that Shi Chani's aura just now was very strange, as if he did not use his own strength. What was the power that Grand Elder used just now? That aura was so terrifying. What was Grand Elder hiding? Just now, Grand Elder condensed a Buddha bead in his palm. Could it be our Shi clans? Everyone discussed, their eyes trembling uncontrollably. Great Wish Bodhi bead. At this time, a low murderous voice rang out. Then, accompanied by a sneer, a figure covered in blood appeared in the air. Lord Patriarch! Everyone's eyes trembled as they looked at the figure covered in blood. It was Shi Donglai. Shi Donglai was sent flying by Shi Chani's palm, but he was only injured. His aura was still as strong as before. Everyone's eyes trembled, but they immediately reacted. Their expressions changed. Lord Patriarch just mentioned the Great Wish Bodhi bead. Could it be that the power that Grand Elder released just now was one of our Shi clan's 3 legendary sacred treasures? The Great Wish Bodhi bead is one of the Shi clan's 3 sacred treasures. So the aura that Grand Elder released just now was the Great Wish Bodhi bead. No wonder it was so terrifying. Grand Elder obtained the Great Wish Bodhi bead. He's really powerful. Even Lord Patriarch is not his match. Everyone discussed animatedly, looking at Shi Chani with shock and fear. No one thought that Shi Chani would have a sacred treasure of the Shi clan. Shi Chani, it seems that I have underestimated you. At this time, Shi Donglai's cold voice rang out. His body shook and the blood stains on his body disappeared. His eyes were sharp and murderous as he said, "So you have the Great Wish Bodhi bead on you. No wonder you dared to stand up against me." Humph! Shi Chani sneered, "Shi Donglai, you're wrong. Even if I didn't have the Great Wish Bodhi bead, I would still stand up today." "Is that so?" Shi Donglai's eyes flashed with a strange light as he said, "I want to know, with your strength, how did you manage to control the Great Wish Bodhi bead? And how many people can you protect today?" The Great Wish Bodhi bead was one of the Shi clan's 3 sacred treasures. Naturally, it was a sacred treasure, and sacred treasures were not something that ordinary people could use. Not to mention that Shi Chani only had the strength of a Stage 9 demi-saint. Even if he was a Stage 9 demi-saint, he would still have to pay a great price to control the Great Wish Bodhi bead. Therefore, Shi Donglai knew that Shi Chani must have paid a great price to be able to use the Great Wish Bodhi bead. And he was confident that even if Shi Chani had the Great Wish Bodhi bead, he might not be his match. A mere stage 9 demi-saint would not be able to exert the true power of the Great Wish Bodhi bead. Attack! Shi Donglai roared in the next moment, his face dark and murderous. Yes. The black-clothed martial artists behind him responded in unison. Their figures moved in an instant, directly surrounding the people of the Shi clan on the square. If you want to kill the people of the Shi clan in front of me, you will have to kill me first. Shi Chani's eyes trembled as he roared. Then, he raised his arm, and a string of black beads flew into the air. Chapter 29-23. A fool's dream. The moment Shi Chani threw out the Great Wish Bodhi beads, everyone's eyes followed it, looking at it with blazing worship, as if they were on a pilgrimage. Hum! Under the gaze of countless eyes, the Great Wish Bodhi beads floated in the air, emitting a low hum, and then began to spin rapidly in the air. Hua, hua, hua! In the next moment, the Great Wish Bodhi beads began to shine brightly. Rays of holy golden light fell down, instantly forming a golden barrier that enveloped everyone on the square. Shi Chani had used the Great Wish Bodhi beads to protect the Shi family members. After doing all this, large beads of sweat appeared on Shi Chani's forehead, his face as pale as paper. Although in the eyes of outsiders, what he had done was a very simple action, activating the power of the Great Wish Bodhi beads was extremely taxing for him. Shi Chani. Shi Donglai looked at Shi Chani, shouting out the latter's name one word at a time. His eyes were as cold as ice, filled with killing intent. He didn't think that in order to stop him from killing the Shi family members, Shi Chani would do this. Shi Donglai, you want to slaughter the Shi family's people in front of me, Shi Chani? Impossible! Shi Chani roared furiously. Is that so? Shi Donglai smiled cold. Shi Chani, you don't have the Great Wish Bodhi beads anymore, how can you fight me? Less nonsense, make your move. Shi Chani coldly responded. He had come here alone and had never thought of surviving. Everything he was doing right now was to buy time for Nye Tian and the others. Of course, he knew that with his strength alone, it was impossible to protect the Shi family members. The only way was to destroy the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array, so that Shi Donglai would no longer have any hope of walking the Scarlet Blood path. Stubborn! Shi Donglai roared, his body as violent as a dragon. He took a step forward, his long sleeves fluttering in the wind as he slammed down with his palm. The surging palm energy turned into a crimson blood palm that pressed down on Shi Chani. Shi Chani showed no fear. His figure moved at the same time, also slamming out with his palm. Bang! Crack, crack, crack! The two palm shadows were like mountains, colliding in the void, causing the space to tremble violently. After that, it was directly torn apart, and a storm of time and space gushed out, wreaking havoc. Shi Donglai's figure swayed slightly as he retreated several steps. On the other hand, Shi Chani retreated a few hundred meters, and after he stabilized his body, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His aged face was pale like a sheet of paper, without the slightest trace of blood. Without the Great Wish Bodhi beads, Shi Chani was obviously not Shi Donglai's match. Furthermore, Shi Donglai had not used his full strength in this palm strike. He was afraid that the collapse of the void would affect the Scarlet Blood Grand Array. Humph! Shi Donglai heavily injured Shi Chani with a single palm strike. He sneered and no longer bothered with him. Instead, his eyes darkened and his aura surged. His palm struck out even more ferociously than before, directly smashing into the Buddha light barrier. Boom! As the palm fell, the Buddha light barrier formed by the Great Wish Bodhi beads suddenly shook. The surrounding void also shook, as if it was about to collapse. Shi Donglai was shocked to see this. He quickly retracted his aura and waved his hand. Waves of energy surged out, stabilizing the shaking space. Ha ha ha! At this time, Shi Chani laughed wildly. He loudly said, Shi Donglai, the strength of your palm cannot break through the Buddha light barrier. If you use brute force, even if the Buddha light barrier is broken, the surrounding space will not be able to withstand it. Your scarlet blood sacrificial array will suffer a great impact. Damn it! Shi Donglai roared. How could he not understand what Shi Chani was saying? At this time, he was in the middle of the grand array. Under the influence of the array, the stability of the surrounding space was much lower than usual. If he used brute force, it was very likely that a large area of space would collapse. At that time, it would inevitably impact the scarlet blood sacrificial array and even affect the overall stability of the array. Although he believed that the scarlet blood sacrificial array was not so fragile and the possibility of it collapsing was very small, he would not take the risk. After all, the scarlet blood sacrificial array was something that the Shi family had spent millions of years to build. If it really collapsed, then everything would be over. The only thing he could do now was to wait. Shi Chani's strength was very weak, so the power of the Buddha beads would not be strong. As long as he waited for the Buddha light barrier to weaken a little, he could directly break it. Humph! Thinking of this, Shi Donglai sneered. He stared coldly at Shi Chani and said, Shi Chani, how long do you think your Buddha light barrier can last? Can't this patriarch see that you are just stalling for time? Do you think that just a few ants from the scarlet blood abyss can destroy the array's eye? You are too naive. Have you forgotten? The scarlet blood sacrificial array is a saint array. There is a protective barrier outside the array's eye. Other than a true saint, no one can break the protective barrier. Just a few ants that you arranged want to break the protective barrier of the saint array? In your dreams. The corners of Shi Donglai's mouth curled up in a disdainful smile, his eyes extremely cold. He already knew that Wei Kong, Shi Lulan, and the others were inside the scarlet blood abyss. Wei Kong and Shi Lulan were both Shi Chani's disciples, so they must have received Shi Chani's orders to enter the scarlet blood abyss in an attempt to destroy the array's eye. But this kind of thinking was simply idiotic. In Shi Donglai's eyes, Wei Kong and the others were already dead. They could not break the protective barrier of the array, and once the array was activated, the space-time vortex that formed would instantly swallow them. You already know. Shi Chani's murky eyes suddenly shrank when he heard Shi Donglai's words. He did not expect that Shi Donglai had already discovered Nie Tian and the others. Of course I know. Shi Donglai sneered. Those few ants are waiting for death in the scarlet blood abyss. This patriarch only needs to wait until the Buddha light barrier weakens, then this patriarch will break it with one palm. At that time, this patriarch wants to see who else you can save. Humph humph humph. This patriarch will not kill you, because I want you to watch as the Shi family members die tragically in front of you one by one, while you are powerless to do anything. Ha ha. At the end of his words, Shi Donglai actually began to laugh wildly, his face twisted and distorted. There was not the slightest trace of a patriarch, he was clearly a demon. Shi Donglai, you beast! Shi Chani roared, his face ashen. From the looks of it, everything was already a dead end. Only a sage could break the protective barrier. How could Nie Tian and the others break it? Unless there was a miracle. Shi Chani's hunched body collapsed to the ground, his eyes dull and cloudy, as if he had lost all his thoughts, becoming old in an instant. At this moment, he deeply felt one word: despair. At the same time, in the scarlet blood abyss, Nie Tian and the others stared at the light sphere array's eye, their expressions extremely ugly. They had already heard Shi Chani's voice and roughly understood the situation above the scarlet blood abyss. But now, what could they do? They were too weak, they could not break the protective barrier of the array. Do we have to take a gamble? At this time, Nie Tian's pupils shrank slightly, the corners of his mouth pulled up in a cold arc, his expression extremely strange. He had thought of a solution, but it was too risky. Chapter 29-24. A shocking gambling idea formed in Nie Tian's mind, but he was hesitant. Because if his method failed, the consequences would be too severe. Brother Nie, what are you thinking about? Wei Kong noticed that something was wrong with Nie Tian's expression and couldn't help but frown. He was worried about Shi Chani's safety and was extremely worried. I want to make a gamble. Nie Tian's eyes darkened as he said in a low voice. What kind of gamble? Wei Kong and Shi Liulan's expressions changed at the same time. When the ball of light absorbs blood, the protective barrier outside the formation will weaken. Nie Tian's face was as dark as water. I've observed for a long time and found that the more blood there is, the stronger the blood stimulates Manjusaka, the weaker the protective barrier will become. So I want to. Saying this, Nie Tian's expression became extremely gloomy. He didn't say it out loud. You want to use your own blood to let the ball of light absorb it to weaken the protective barrier. Wei Kong was extremely intelligent and immediately understood Nie Tian's meaning. Nie Tian's blood had an extremely strong stimulating effect on Manjusaka. Even his blood qi could cause Manjusaka to open up. It was because of this that Shi Donglai had issued the order to capture Nie Tian. Shi Donglai felt that Nie Tian's blood alone was enough to activate the scarlet blood sacrificial array. Nie Tian's idea was to use his own blood to stimulate the ball of light to weaken the protective barrier, then break the barrier and destroy the formation core. However, this idea of his was too risky. First, he couldn't be sure how much blood he would need to use to weaken the protective barrier to the point where it could be broken. What if the scarlet blood sacrificial array was activated during this process? Secondly, even if they really broke the protective barrier, would they be able to destroy the formation core? Finally, once the scarlet blood sacrificial array was activated, the consequences would be unimaginable. According to Shi Chani, after the Scarlet Blood Road was opened, the entrance to the reincarnation holy domain would be opened. At that time, a space-time black hole would appear. If it was light, it would destroy the eye of the sea of bitterness. If it was heavy, it would destroy the entire sacred soul realm. If Nie Tian did as he thought, then once he failed, that would be the same as personally opening the path to the Scarlet Blood sect. And the price of opening the Scarlet Blood Road was incomparably huge. Therefore, Nie Tian's idea was no different from a shocking gamble. What they were betting on was the entire shores of the Sea of Bitterness, and even the entire sacred soul realm. Nie Tian could not afford such a huge gamble. However, at this moment, Nie Tian's eyes trembled slightly. He nodded heavily and said, "This is the only way, the only chance." Wei Kong and Shi Liulan's expressions froze, and they fell into a deep silence. Of course, they knew what would happen if they failed such a gamble. But now, this method was really the only chance. If they did not do so, they could only wait for death. When the Buddha light barrier weakened, Shi Donglai would definitely sacrifice the lives of the Shi family members to open the Scarlet Blood path. If the Shi family members did not have enough blood, Shi Donglai would definitely kill the others, and even the elders around him, until the Scarlet Blood path was opened. The blood of the Shi family members had a special stimulating effect on Manjusaka, so the Scarlet Blood path could be opened with 100% certainty. The only difference was that the Scarlet Blood path would be opened a little later. But what was the point of delaying it a little? Nie Tian, take the gamble. The Ghost Emperor's solemn voice sounded at this time. Nie Tian's pupils shrank abruptly, and the flickering light in his eyes became firm in an instant. The corners of his mouth twitched, and he squeezed out a single word, gamble. He no longer had a choice in the situation he was facing, and he could only take the gamble. If he did not take the gamble, he would be waiting for death, but if he took the gamble, there was still a chance. And Wei Kang's eyes darkened slightly when he heard Nie Tian's words, and he nodded heavily. Shi Liulan's stiff face recovered slightly, and she could only nod in agreement. Brother Wei, I'll weaken the barrier, I'll leave the matter of breaking it to you. Nie Tian's expression was solemn, and his eyes were filled with unswerving determination as he looked at Wei Kong. Although Wei Kang's injuries were severe, he was still the strongest among the three of them. Only he could break the barrier. Rest assured, Brother Nye. I, Wei Kong, will bet this life of mine to break the barrier. Wei Kong nodded solemnly, his eyes as firm as steel. Senior brother, I'll help you. Shi Lulon looked at Wei Kong and said excitedly. Wei Kong nodded, his expression solemn. He had already prepared himself for the worst. Even if he had to die, he would definitely break the barrier. Brother Wei, 8th young miss, I'm going to start. Nye Tian nodded. His figure flickered, and he approached the glowing sphere formation's eye, hovering in midair. Sensing the glowing sphere formation's aura, his eyes focused, and his body shook violently. Immediately, the blood qi around his body surged, and waves of blood qi were released. The surrounding space became incomparably bloody. When the blood qi circulated in the air, a strange scene occurred. Lines of formation runes appeared in the space, and they instantly absorbed the blood qi in the air. The glowing sphere formation's eye immediately reacted, releasing rays of strange light that circulated in the void. It was extremely dazzling. However, this beautiful glowing sphere contained extremely powerful destructive power, enough to destroy the entire Saint's soul domain. As the blood qi in his body was released bit by bit, Nye Tian's face became paler and paler. However, he completely ignored it and continued to release blood qi. At this time, he could feel the invisible barrier in the space weakening bit by bit, and the corners of his mouth curled up involuntarily. Brother Nye! Wei Kong shouted anxiously when he saw Nye Tian's incomparably pale face. Don't do it, it's not enough yet. Nye Tian replied in a low voice. Although the barrier was weakening, it was far from enough. With Wei Kang's strength, it was impossible for him to break the barrier. Although Wei Kong was anxious, he could only wait. At the same time, outside the abyss, in the sky above the Cloud Buddha mountain range, the countless Manjusaka in the sky formed a sky-piercing red ribbon. Under the stimulation of the fiend god's blood, it actually began to open. The red ribbons released dazzling crimson halos that dyed the entire sky red. It was as if the sunset had covered the entire world. It was magnificent and magnificent. What's going on? The people of the Shi family on the square were shocked when they saw this scene. They had no idea what was happening. We didn't use our blood to stimulate it. Why did the Manjusaka open up? An elder of the Shi family asked in astonishment. Could it be that the blood just now has an effect? Another elder asked doubtfully. Impossible, the blood alone isn't enough to fully stimulate the Manjusaka. Shi Donglai frowned and said in a low voice. Could it be? In the next moment, he suddenly thought of something. His expression changed abruptly, and in a flash, he appeared in the sky above the scarlet blood abyss. He lowered his head to look at the abyss, and the scene that entered his eyes caused his entire body to stiffen. His face was filled with disbelief. How could he have imagined that Nye Tian would release blood qi of his own accord for the glowing sphere formation's eye to absorb? Chapter 29-25. The barrier shattered. Shi Donglai couldn't believe his eyes. Nye Tian was releasing his blood qi. Wasn't this helping him open the path of scarlet blood? In an instant, his eyes blazed with a fervent light. He didn't know why Nye Tian was doing this, but he knew that once the ball of light absorbed Nye Tian's blood qi, the path of scarlet blood would be opened. At this time, Nye Tian was hovering in midair, his blood qi surging wildly. His face was deathly pale, and his body was much thinner than before. The blood qi in his body was almost depleted. If this continued, he would die from exhaustion. He could already feel that the barrier had weakened to a critical point. It could not weaken any further. Wei Kong and Shi Lulon watched from below, their eyes shining brightly as they waited for Nye Tian to speak. Wei Kong. Finally, Nye Tian's voice rang out. His body moved as he retreated frantically. Good! Wei Kang's eyes trembled. With a low roar, the saber intent around him surged. The seven-night demonic dragon slash in his hand surged with terrifying saber intent. 1. At this time, the seven-night demonic dragon let out a low hum. The seven-night dark light was unsealed. In an instant, the violent saber intent surged in the air. Wei Kang's saber intent surged madly. However, Wei Kong did not act immediately. His eyes narrowed as he gripped the seven-night demonic dragon with both hands. Wang! Another low hum sounded, reverberating in the air. The second seven-night dark light was unsealed. Senior brother! Shi Lulan's eyes trembled as she cried out in alarm. She knew that one seven-night dark light was already Wei Kang's limit. Unsealing two seven-night dark light at the same time was too much of a pressure on his martial physique. Junior sister, step back! Wei Kong roared, his long hair fluttering in the air. He looked like a demon among sabers. He was betting his life. He had to break the protective barrier. The two seven-night dark light made Wei Kang's martial physique and the seven-night demonic dragon bear the pressure of the saber intent. He gripped the seven-night demonic dragon with both hands, almost losing control of the saber. Tears flowed down the corners of Shi Lulan's eyes as she retreated. Seven-night demon dragon, black dragon devours the world. Wei Kong roared in a low voice. After which, his silhouette moved, the saber intent in his body surged to the extreme as he executed the seven-night demonic dragon A gigantic shadow of a demonic dragon appeared, exuding a majestic aura, akin to an avalanche. Bang! In the next moment, a muffled sound of thunder rang out. The void suddenly trembled, and a terrifying shock wave surged out in all directions. It landed on the surrounding mountains and left deep ravines. Rumble! The entire abyss shook violently as if it were about to collapse. Bang! However, in the next moment, that frightening blade image shattered. Wei Kang's body suddenly trembled, and then he was sent flying. Just as his body was about to smash into the stone wall, a figure flashed past and caught him. Senior brother. The person who caught Wei Kong was none other than Shi Lulan. When she saw Wei Kang's body was covered in blood and his breathing was extremely weak, she let out a sorrowful cry. However, Wei Kong had already fainted, and his life force was slowly weakening. Nie Tian frowned slightly as he looked up at the sky. He saw several white cracks in the sky. It was a sign that the protective barrier was about to break. Although Wei Kang's saber strike had failed to break the protective barrier, it had left several cracks on it. However, at this moment, the cracks were slowly disappearing and mending. Lulu. Seeing this, Nie Tian's eyes darkened, and he let out a low roar. Even though his blood qi had been depleted to its limit, he had no choice but to fight with his life on the line. Nie Tian, are you crazy? Lulu was taken aback, and he shouted. Of course, he knew that Nie Tian wanted him to activate the power of the Holy Soul curse mark. However, Nie Tian had already used the Holy Soul curse mark once not long ago, and his blood qi was severely depleted. Could he still withstand the power of the Holy Soul curse mark? Lulu. But at this time, Nie Tian let out another low roar, and his figure moved. Sword intent surged wildly from all over his body, the power of godfiends circulated frantically, and the power of stars also started surging out incessantly. Lunatic! Lulu cursed angrily, but he still activated the Holy Soul curse mark again. Since things had already come to this, he could only fight with his life on the line. Boom! In midair, the sword intent around Nie Tian's body was violent to the extreme, and a terrifying sword aura enveloped his body. Sacred heaven-defying sword, Earth's sword engulfs the moon. Sensing that the power of the Holy Soul curse mark had already reached its strongest explosive point, Nie Tian let out a low roar, and the starry sky pierced out. Sword shadows whizzed out, bombarding the several white cracks. Huh! At the same time, above the abyss, Shi Donglai saw everything, and his face suddenly darkened as he let out a cry of horror. Not even in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that Nie Tian and Wei Kong would actually have such heaven-defying methods. At this time, He already understood why Nyetian had taken the initiative to release his blood chi. Next, if Nyetian broke through the protective barrier, the light sphere array core would be in danger. Boom! Pung pung pung! At this moment, the sword's shadow fell, heavily bombarding the cracks on the barrier. The void suddenly shook, following which the cracks suddenly expanded. The invisible barrier directly began to collapse. And at this moment, Nyetian's figure trembled, and then he was sent flying. But when he saw the protective barrier collapsing in the air, the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. In midair, he opened the 9 extreme powers, and with a thought, a giant scarlet beast appeared, using its flesh and blood to protect him. In the next moment, the giant scarlet beast's body slammed into the stone wall, but it still managed to protect Nyetian. Sure Luolan's beautiful eyes trembled as she stared at the giant scarlet beast. She didn't expect Nyetian to have such a trump card. Roar! The giant scarlet beast let out a low roar, and its body stabilized, unharmed. On top of the giant scarlet beast, Nyetian barely managed to stand, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly as he said, "Jinin, thank you." Roar roar. Jinin seemed to understand Nyetian's words, and it let out 2 low roars, its eyes spitting out golden flames. Damn it! Above the abyss, Shi Donglai's face suddenly darkened when he saw the protective barrier being broken. He let out a roar, and his eyes were incomparably ferocious, like a vicious wolf. How could he have imagined that the protective barrier that only a sage could break would be broken by Nyetian and Wei Kong? Boom! And at this time the entire Cloud Buddha mountain range suddenly shook, as if the earth was about to crack and the mountains were about to collapse. Then, the light sphere array core suddenly shook violently, as if it was about to collapse. Shi Donglai's eyes trembled, and then a look of pleasant surprise appeared on his face. This was a sign that the scarlet blood path was about to open. However, it seemed like the light sphere array core was still lacking some energy. Shi Donglai's angry eyes instantly turned fiery. He raised his head to look at the Buddhist light barrier, and his face sank. If he wanted to break the Buddhist light barrier now, it would be too late. Since it was too late, he could only take a shortcut. Lord Patriarch, the scarlet blood path is about to open. Behind Shi Donglai, several black-robed cultivators exclaimed, their eyes blazing with excitement. Chapter 29-26. Blood Dragon Formation. Lord Clan Leader, what are you doing? The group of cultivators in black looked at Shi Donglai and felt the murderous intent in his eyes. They were so scared that their faces turned pale and their voices began to tremble. What do you think? Shi Donglai sneered and stretched out his hand. A violent force filled the air and directly grabbed the dozens of cultivators in black and threw them into the blood-red abyss. Ah! Immediately after, a series of miserable screams rang out. The dozens of cultivators in black were instantly turned into meat paste by the power of the formation. They turned into a bloody light and were absorbed by the light sphere. After absorbing the blood, the light sphere shook even more violently and began to spin rapidly. Just a little more. Shi Donglai stared at the light sphere, his eyes glowing with a red light. He was incomparably fanatical. He suddenly turned around but found that there was no one beside him. After what had just happened, who would dare to approach him again? Huh! Shi Donglai's face darkened and his eyes turned cold. Lord Clan Leader, you have to calm down. At this time, a few reckless elders walked over and tried to persuade Shi Donglai to calm down. I am very calm. Shi Donglai sneered and his figure moved instantly. Everywhere he passed, he stretched out his hand and directly grabbed the elders and threw them into the blood-red abyss. The clan leader has gone mad. The other elders cried out in shock when they saw this scene. Mad? Shi Donglai sneered and said coldly, as long as I can open the blood-red path, so what if I'm mad? As soon as he finished speaking, his aura was released wildly. His entire body surged with a violent red light and he rushed into the group of cultivators in black like a ferocious tiger. Everywhere his figure passed, there were ghostly wails and wolf howls. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of cultivators in black and more than a dozen elders were killed by Shi Donglai and thrown into the blood-red abyss. Inside the abyss, the light sphere spun even faster, but there was no other reaction. Damn it! It's still not enough. Shi Donglai roared as he looked at the light sphere and flew into a rage. However, there was no one around him that he could kill. He looked at Shi Chani and didn't attack. Instead, he said in a cold voice, Shi Chani, I want you to personally witness how I enter the samsara holy world. As he finished speaking, Shi Donglai's body shook and several bloody holes appeared on his body. Blood gushed out like a fountain as he fell into the scarlet blood abyss. In order to open the scarlet blood road, he had actually bled himself. One had to admit that Shi Donglai was extremely cruel and merciless. He was even willing to kill himself. At the same time, under the abyss, Nie Tian stood up from Jin An's body. After a short period of recuperation, his complexion had slightly improved. However, he still looked very thin, and the blood qi he had consumed hadn't recovered yet. Eighth young miss, you and Wei Kong will enter the 9 extremes first. Nie Tian looked at Shi Lulan and said solemnly. N. Shi Lulan nodded and led Wei Kong to stand beside Nie Tian. Nie Tian sensed Wei Kang's aura. Although it was very weak, it was still there. He wouldn't die anytime soon. Fat Cat was also in the 9 extremes. He wouldn't let Wei Kong die. Nie Tian, what are you doing? Shi Lulan looked at Nie Tian, her beautiful eyes flashing as she asked. The protective barrier has been broken. There's only one step left. Nie Tian looked at the rapidly spinning sphere of light and said solemnly. Then be careful. Shi Lulan knew that it was useless for her to stay. She nodded lightly and brought Wei Kong into the 9 extremes. Nie Tian's eyes flashed and his lips curled into a cold smile. Then, he moved, approaching the sphere of light. He was extremely cautious and didn't dare to be careless. Destroying the sphere of light was the last step. There couldn't be any mistakes. Slowly, he approached the sphere of light. He could clearly feel the enormous power contained in the sphere of light. It was truly endless. 1,000 meters, 500 meters, 300 meters, 100 meters. He approached step by step. Soon, he was only 100 meters away from the sphere of light. Nie Tian, give this emperor some time. The ghost emperor's voice sounded out at this moment. The sphere of light in front of him was too huge. Given Nie Tian's current state, he couldn't destroy it directly. Therefore, he had to let the ghost emperor find the weakness of the sphere of light. The sphere of light was the core of a large array. It was also the weakest point of a large array. Nie Tian let out a deep breath. Although he tried his best to maintain his calm, he couldn't help but feel nervous. Every move he made would affect the safety of the entire sacred soul domain. How could he not be nervous? Nie Tian gazed at the glowing sphere in the eye of the spell formation and saw numerous crimson magical symbols swirling within it. He could sense with great clarity that each and every magical symbol contained extremely formidable power. In the sky above the abyss, Shi Donglai's eyes trembled as he stared at the sphere of light. He could feel that the sphere of light was accumulating energy to open the scarlet blood path. Now that the scarlet blood sacrificial array was in full operation, the opening of the scarlet blood path was only a matter of time. Shi Donglai's heart was in his throat when he saw Nie Tian's figure. Under normal circumstances, an ordinary martialist wouldn't be able to destroy the sphere of light. However, Shi Donglai knew that Nie Tian wasn't an ordinary martialist. Nie Tian had already broken through the protective barrier of the array, so he might really be able to destroy the sphere of light now. If Nie Tian destroyed the sphere of light, then everything would be over. To Shi Donglai, opening the scarlet blood path and entering the samsara sacred domain was the most important thing. It was what he had been pursuing his entire life. Boom! A moment later, the sphere of light suddenly released a terrifying scarlet wave that swept through the space. Nye Tian only managed to regain his footing with the help of the golden Leopardi's strength. Whoosh! In the next moment, a crimson pillar of light suddenly shot out from the eye of the formation, shooting straight into the sky. The scarlet beam of light was incomparably violent as it shot straight into the sky. It connected the clouds and the abyss, like a scarlet pillar that stood between heaven and earth. Boom! High up in the sky, a thunderous sound was heard as a huge space-time gap was blasted open in the sky. Suddenly, dark clouds rolled and strong winds raged. Heaven and earth fell into chaos as if it was the end of the world. The entire shore of the bitter sea was shrouded in dark clouds in an instant and became incomparably dark. The sun and moon lost their light and the sky changed color. Ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. The scarlet blood path is about to open. Shi Donglai looked at the terrifying scene in the sky and laughed wildly as if he had gone mad. Boom boom boom. Following that, the huge space-time gap began to expand and endless space-time vortexes appeared, wreaking havoc. In the blink of an eye, the space-time gap in the sky collapsed and spread over a radius of tens of thousands of meters. At the center of the space-time collapse was a vortex that was as dark as night. Its aura was extremely terrifying, like a giant doomsday beast that could devour everything. Space-time black hole. Shi Chan-yi looked at the pitch-black vortex. His turbid eyes trembled and his lips trembled as he muttered. Chapter 29-27. Chapter 292. A black hole. Shi Chan-yi looked at the black vortex in the sky, and his old face instantly froze. The first black hole had appeared. This was the first time Shi Chan-yi had seen a black hole, and the shock in his heart could be imagined. It was rumored that a black hole could devour everything. Even a black hole several meters wide could devour a mountain. Shi Chan-yi estimated that the black hole in the sky was dozens of meters wide, and it was enough to devour everything within tens of thousands of meters. Boom, boom, boom. The moment the black hole appeared, the sky exploded with a terrifying roar. The devouring power of the black hole was extremely terrifying. It tore apart the surrounding spacetime, and large swathes of space collapsed. Even the spacetime storm was instantly devoured by the black hole. At the same time that the black hole appeared, a blazing white vortex appeared not far from the scarlet light pillar. It became the only light in the void. A spacetime light hole. Shi Chan-yi looked at the light, and his dull face trembled with shock. That was a space-time light hole, the legendary passage to the sacred world. The Scarlet Blood Path was to create a space-time light hole that connected to the reincarnation sacred world. A space-time black hole and a space-time light hole were two extremely opposing existences. Extreme light was bound to be accompanied by extreme darkness. The reincarnation passage has appeared. Shi Donglai also saw the space-time light hole, and his eyes trembled with a fanatical expression. The Shi family's millions of years of effort was for the reincarnation passage. But at this time, the spacetime light hole was not very stable, and with the appearance of the spacetime black hole, the space around the scarlet light pillar was very unstable. So Shi Donglai had to wait until spacetime stabilized a little, then he could enter the reincarnation passage and enter the reincarnation sacred world. At the same time, at the bottom of the scarlet blood abyss, Nye Tian looked at the scene in the sky, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. He urged, "Ghost Emperor, are you still not done?" The first spacetime black hole had appeared. If he didn't destroy the light sphere formation more spacetime black holes would appear, and then it would be very troublesome. "Don't worry, give this Emperor a little more time," Ghost Emperor replied. He was also anxious, even more so than Nye Tian. But at this time, it was useless to be anxious. The more anxious they were, the worse things would be. The Ghost Emperor had to find the weakness of the light ball formation core. Only then could Nye Tian destroy the light ball formation core. Phew! Nie Tian took a deep breath. His whole body was already drenched in cold sweat. At this moment, the survival of the entire Holy Soul region was at stake. How could he not be anxious? If the light sphere array core was not destroyed, more spacetime black holes would appear. By then, the entire Holy Soul region would be devoured by the spacetime black hole. Shi Donglai was truly ruthless. In order to enter the Samsara holy world, he didn't hesitate to destroy a domain. He could even kill a member of the Shi family and himself, so why would he care about the other people of the Saint Soul region? All right. At that moment, the Ghost Emperor's excited voice echoed out. Nie Tian, take a closer look. There are some dark patterns surging on the glowing sphere's eye. The place where those patterns converge is the weak point of the eye. Okay. Nie Tian replied and immediately prepared to attack, but the Ghost Emperor stopped him. Don't be anxious. There are 9 points where the dark runes converge, and these 9 points are constantly moving. You have to destroy all 9 points at the same time, understand? The Ghost Emperor shouted anxiously. Nie Tian only had one chance to attack. If he failed to destroy the formation core on his first attack, the formation core would definitely retaliate, and he wouldn't be able to withstand the force of the formation core's retaliation. Understood. Nie Tian took a deep breath, and the holographic divine runes enveloped him. At the same time, he opened his demonic eye and released his senses to the limit. At this moment, he saw countless dark runes surging on the light ball formation core. It was as if there was darkness hidden under the light. Then, he followed the dark runes and searched for the point where the dark runes converged. He was extremely nervous, and his forehead was covered in sweat. Time ticked by. Found it! Nie Tian shouted in surprise after a while. He had found the first point where the dark runes converge. Then, he sped up. 3, 6, 9. Soon, he found the point where the 9 dark runes converged. His eyes suddenly narrowed. Attack! The Ghost Emperor roared and shouted. Nie Tian didn't have much time. He had to attack immediately. Okay. Nie Tian answered. Starlight Heavenly Slash appeared in his hand, and he stabbed it wildly. 9 sword shadows whizzed out at the same time, rushing towards the 9 points where the dark runes converged. Bang! 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 The next moment, the 9 sword shadows landed on the light ball formation core. A dull sound was heard, and the 9 points where the dark runes converged were instantly destroyed. Boom! Crack! Immediately afterward, the rapidly rotating ball of light suddenly shook, and a crack appeared on it. Seeing the crack on the light ball formation core, Nie Tian's eyes suddenly trembled, and he shouted in surprise, Success! Crack, crack, crack! Just as he finished speaking, the crack on the light ball formation core instantly split open, and the crack spread in all directions. Bang! However, at that instant the light ball formation core shook again, and another pillar of light burst out. Oh no! Nie Tian's eyes flickered, and his heart sank as he exclaimed. He didn't expect the light ball formation core to release another pillar of light before it was destroyed. Bang! In the next moment, with a muffled explosion, the light ball formation core finally couldn't hold on any longer, and instantly exploded. A tremendous and pure force surged in all directions. Before Nie Tian could react, he felt a wave of pure energy spreading toward him, but it didn't cause him any harm. Furthermore, at that instant, he felt that he had absorbed a tremendous amount of energy. This surge of energy allowed him to instantly recover more than half of his condition. He could even feel signs of a breakthrough, as if he was about to advance to the 4th order half-sacred realm. Nie Tian, we can't waste this energy. Let the people inside the 9 superbs come out. The Ghost Emperor said with a laugh at the critical moment of life and death. This was the formation core of the sacred formation, and the energy contained within it was simply unimaginable. In just an instant, the pure and majestic energy filled the entire scarlet blood abyss. It would be a pity to let this energy flow away. Okay. Nie Tian agreed, then took out the 9 superbs, and let everyone out, including Fat Cat, Cher, Jinan, and a few other godly beasts. Following that, Nie Tian raised his head to look at the void, and his eyes narrowed slightly as he said in a deep voice, "Next, it's time to deal with the last problem." Fat Cat and the others stayed in the abyss, and the rest would depend on Nie Tian. At that moment, there were 2 space-time black holes in the sky, and each of them had expanded to a radius of 100 meters. Chapter 29-28. Nie Tian, think of a way to merge the space-time light hole and the space-time black hole together. This is your only chance. Fat Cat looked at Nie Tian and said in a low voice. And Nie Tian nodded, then his figure flashed, soaring into the sky. He naturally knew what the space-time light hole and space-time black hole that Fat Cat spoke of were. At this time, if he failed, then at the very least, the entire Sea of Bitterness cliff would be swallowed. If the space-time black hole continued to expand, then the entire Saint Soul domain would be swallowed. Therefore, he must destroy the space-time black hole. Only then would the collapsing space-time slowly stabilize. Nie Tian's figure was extremely fast, instantly leaving the abyss. Nie Tian. Sure Chani saw a figure fly out from the scarlet blood abyss. His eyes narrowed, and when he saw that it was Nie Tian, he couldn't help exclaiming. He had never imagined that Nie Tian was still alive. He had originally completely despaired, but Nie Tian's appearance made him almost cry with joy. Nie Tian coming out from the scarlet blood abyss meant that the formation I had been destroyed. Senior, take the Sure family members into the scarlet blood abyss to hide. Leave the rest to me. Nie Tian looked at Sure Chani, shouting, then his figure flashed, directly soaring into the sky. Nie Tian didn't know what would happen next, but the scarlet blood abyss was underground, so it should be relatively safe. Nie Tian. Sure Chani's eyes couldn't help trembling when he saw Nie Tian's figure soaring into the sky, incomparably horrified. At this time, the space-time above the horizon had already collapsed, and space was in chaos. From Sure Chani's point of view, disaster was inevitable. He could only hope that this space-time disaster wouldn't affect the entire Saint Soul domain. Nie Tian was soaring into the sky. What was he trying to do? Did he want to destroy the space-time black hole? The space-time black hole was a terrifying existence. Even a saint might not be able to destroy it. Nie Tian, come back! Sure Chan cried out in alarm as soon as he thought of this. But Nie Tian's figure had already soared into the sky, disappearing into the space-time turbulence. Sigh. Sure Chani let out a long sigh. His face was filled with helplessness as he opened the Buddhist light barrier and brought the Sure clan members into the scarlet blood abyss to seek refuge. High up in the sky, dark clouds surged, violent winds howled, and the world was in a state of chaos. Hong hong hong. Endless space-time vortexes appeared, incomparably berserk, as if they wanted to devour everything. 2 figures appeared in the chaotic space-time. One was Nie Tian and the other was Sure Donglai. Nie Tian wanted to destroy the space-time black hole before it devoured everything, while Sure Donglai wanted to enter the samsara sacred world before the space-time light hole disappeared. Humph! Sure Donglai sneered when he saw Nie Tian. Don't you want to enter the sacred world of samsara? Of course, he did not think that Nie Tian was here to destroy the space-time black hole. He thought that Nie Tian wanted to enter the space-time black hole just like him. QL11 At that moment there were 2 space-time light holes in the sky, which meant that there were 2 passageways into the samsara sacred world. If Nie Tian really wanted to enter, he really had a chance. In fact, he had a better chance than Sure Donglai. Although Sure Donglai's strength was far superior to his, Sure Donglai's chances of survival were much slimmer than Nie Tian's due to the space-time collapse. Nie Tian had the first Devil Fire's universe boundary in his body. At that moment, he had already used the universe boundary to form a space-time shield that enveloped his body, so he was temporarily safe. If he had not encountered the spacetime vortex head-on, his spacetime shield would not have shattered. Moreover, his perception of spacetime was very strong, so he could avoid the deadly spacetime attacks in time. Shi Donglai, on the other hand, was rushing left and right, completely relying on his valiant strength to resist the impact of the spacetime vortex. Nie Tian's figure was agile and swift as he rapidly approached the spacetime black hole. How is this possible? Shi Donglai's face was extremely gloomy when he saw this scene. He could not understand why Nie Tian seemed to be like a fish in water in the spacetime turbulence. In the next moment, Shi Donglai's eyes darkened as he said coldly, "Stinking brat, you are only at the half-saint realm. Approaching the spacetime black hole is courting death." He did not know what Nie Tian wanted to do, but he was sure that as long as Nie Tian was within 10,000 meters of the spacetime black hole, he would definitely die. Even a pseudo-sage expert like him could not resist the powerful devouring power of the spacetime black hole. At that moment, earth-shattering changes were also taking place below. Rumble! 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 Under the powerful devouring power of the spacetime black hole, the entire Cloud Buddha mountain range began to shake. Mountain peaks were directly uprooted by the violent suction force and rose into the air, approaching the spacetime black hole. Columns of water appeared on the surface of the sea, whistling like raging dragons. The entire Cloud Buddha Sea was in turmoil, as if doomsday had arrived. Under such circumstances, as long as the spacetime black hole continued to exist for a few more minutes, the entire Cloud Buddha Sea would be completely devoured. Once the Cloud Buddha Sea was devoured, the next step would be the shore of the Sea of Bitterness. Nie Tian, who was in the chaotic space, felt the terrifying impact of the spacetime around him. He was extremely nervous. The closer he got to the spacetime black hole, the more he felt the terrifying devouring power of the spacetime. Nie Tian, you can't go any closer. The spacetime black hole will directly devour you. At that moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice was heard, and he shouted nervously, "I know." Nie Tian frowned and looked at the two spacetime light holes on the other side. It was impossible for him to destroy the spacetime black hole with his strength. His only chance was to fuse the two spacetime black holes and the spacetime light holes to resist and destroy each other. The spacetime black hole and spacetime light hole were like two different attributes of spacetime. One was darkness and the other was light. They could fuse and disappear. But now, how could Nie Tian make the spacetime black hole and spacetime light hole approach each other? Nie Tian estimated that the distance between the two spacetime black holes and spacetime light holes was hundreds of thousands of meters. At such a distance, he didn't know how long it would take for them to rely on the natural attraction between them to approach each other. By that time, the entire Bitter Sea horizon would probably be devoured, and spacetime would have collapsed to the point where it couldn't be restored. Nie Tian, can't you create cosmic lines? Use cosmic lines to create a spatial track to speed up the distance between the black hole and the spacetime hole? At that moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice was heard loudly. Okay. When Nie Tian heard the Ghost Emperor's words, his eyes lit up, and he immediately understood what the latter meant. Now, the spacetime black hole and spacetime light hole were slowly approaching each other, but the speed was too slow. Nie Tian could use cosmic lines to create a spatial track and use the power of heaven and earth to speed up the distance between the black hole and the spacetime light hole. The Ghost Emperor was indeed a sacred array master. He could even think of such an idea. With an idea in mind, Nie Tian immediately got to work. His figure moved instantly, and he soon arrived in between the spacetime black hole and spacetime light hole. In the next moment, the boundary of the universe appeared on his palm, and he concentrated and started to create cosmic lines.